Her head snapped back as one would from a blow. Then she folded her hands in her lap. It was better this way. It would have happened eventually anyway, she reminded herself. Better to get it over with quick and early. No, that would be rude. He laughed, dropped back behind the wheel. Oh, I see. There's an etiquette to mind reading. I don't read minds. She gripped her fingers together, taut wires, white at the stress points. She let out a breath to relieve the pressure in her chest and stared straight ahead. It's more a reading of feelings. I've learned to block it out, as it's not pleasant, whatever you might think, to have other people's emotions pounding at you. It's fairly easy to filter it, but now and again, if I'm not paying attention, something, particularly strong emotions, slide through. I apologize for intruding on your privacy. He said nothing for a moment, just sat with his head back and his eyes closed. No, I'm sorry. That was nasty. I'm feeling nasty, as you picked up on. I guess I needed to take a swipe at somebody and you were elected. I understand that it's uncomfortable to be with someone you can't trust, someone you feel can and will take advantage of your own thoughts and feelings, use them to control you or hurt you or direct your life. That's one of the reasons I tried to explain to you why I'm not good at relationships, why I don't want to be involved in one. It's perfectly understandable to have questions and doubts, and for those questions and doubts to lead to resentment and distrust. She fell silent, used the silence to gear herself up for the rest. That, Cade said mildly, is an amazing pile of bullshit. Mind if I asked whose words you just put in my mouth? They were your own words. She shifted, leaning on her own crutch of bitterness to face him. I am what I am, and I can't change it. I know how to cope and how to get by. I don't want or expect anyone to stand with me. I don't need anyone to. I've learned to accept my life just the way it is, and I don't give a damn if you or anyone else doesn't. You better watch out for gopher holes, Tori. That's a very high horse you're sitting on. When she reached for the door handle, he just lifted an eyebrow. Coward. Her fingers tightened on it, then released. Bastard. That's right, I was, for taking out a piss-poor mood on you. I was told tonight that sorries are just excuses for bad behavior, but I'm sorry anyway. You, however, are dumping opinions on me that I haven't expressed and don't have. I can't give them to you as I haven't finished making them yet. When something's important, I like to take the time to study on it. You seem to be important. He leaned over. Instinctively, she pressed back into the seat. You know, that's something that irritates me right down to the bone. Calmly, he drew her seatbelt over, hooked it. And it's a challenge at the same time. You see, I'm just bound and determined to keep touching you, to keep getting closer until you stop pulling back. He started the engine, tossed an arm over the seat, let his gaze rest on hers before he backed the car up the lane. You can chalk it up to pride and ego if you like. I don't mind a bit. He swung onto the road, punched the gas. I've never hit a woman. He said it conversationally, but she heard the viciously controlled anger beneath. I won't start with you. I'd like to have my hands on you. I damn well intend to have them on you eventually, but I won't hurt you. I don't think every man uses his fists on women. She looked out the window, gathering her composure the way she gathered bricks for her wall. I worked that and several other issues out in therapy. Good. He said it simply. Then I won't have to worry every move I make comes off as a threat to you. I don't mind making you nervous, but I do mind scaring you. If I were afraid of you, I wouldn't be here. The wind flowed over her face, through her hair. I'm not a pushover, Kate, or anyone's doormat, not anymore. He waited a beat. If you were, I wouldn't want you here. She turned her head just a little, studied him with a sidelong glance. That was a very smart thing to say. Maybe the best thing that could be said. Even better, I believe you mean it. I'm one of those peculiar creatures who tries to mean what they say. I believe that, too. She took a deep breath. I wasn't going to come tonight. I was going to walk out of the house, tell you I wasn't coming, explain how things were going to be. And here I am. You felt sorry for me. He shot her a glance. That was your first mistake. She gave a short laugh. I suppose. Where are we going? No place special. Good. She settled back, surprised at how quickly, how easily she relaxed. That's a fine spot. He drove farther than he'd intended, choosing back roads at random, but always winding his way east, toward the sea. The sun dipped lower behind them, shooting streaks of red across the sky that seemed to bleed down into the fields, pour through the stands of trees, drip into the snaking curve of the river. He let her choose the music, and though Mozart blasted out rather than the rock he would have selected, it seemed to suit the oncoming twilight. He found a little waterside restaurant well south of the crowds that flocked to Myrtle Beach. It was warm enough to sit outside at a little table where a squat white candle sputtered in a glass globe, and the conversation around them was muted under the steady rise and slap of the surf. On the beach, children chased the bug-eyed sand crabs into their holes or threw breadcrumbs into the air for the crying gulls. A group of young people thrashed in the surf and sent out the squeals and shouts that were caught between mating calls and childhood. In a sky still deep blue with the last gasp of day, the first star winked to life and shone like a single diamond. The tension and temper of the day melted out of her mind. She didn't think she was hungry. Her appetite was never particularly keen, but she poked at her salad while he began to tell her of his work. "When you feel your eyes begin to glaze over, just stop me. I don't bore that easy, and I know something about organic cotton. The gift shop where I worked in Charleston sold organic cotton shirts. We got them from California. They were pricey, but sold well for us. Give me the name of the shop. Lavelle Cotton started manufacturing organic last year. I can guarantee we'll beat the price from California. That's part of what I haven't been able to get across as well as I'd like. Growing organically after you're established competes head-on with chemical methods, and the product commands a premium in the marketplace. Which equals more profit." Exactly. He buttered a roll, passed it to her. "People listen to profit more than they listen to environmental concerns. I can talk about pesticide drift, the effect on wildlife and edge species." Edge species? Quail and other birds that nest in the grass along the fields. Hunters shoot the quail, eat the quail, and consume the pesticide. Then there's insecticide. Sure, they kill off the pests, but they also kill off the good bugs, infect birds, reduce the food chain. A chick eats a dead or dying insect after spray, and then the chick's infected. It's a cycle you can't break until you try another method. Odd, she thought, to realize she'd carried her father's view of farming inside her, where nature was the enemy to be fought day after day, with the government running a close second. "You love it, farming." "Yes, why wouldn't I?" She shook her head. "A great many people make a living doing things they don't enjoy and have no real talent for. I was supposed to go on and work at the tool and die factory after high school. I took business courses in secret rather than argue about it, so I suppose I know what it's like to go against the grain to do what you want to do." "How did you know what you wanted to do?" "I just wanted to be smart." To escape, she thought, but steered the conversation back to him. "The organic method's sensible and certainly forward-thinking, but if you don't spray, you've got weeds and disease and pests. You've got a sick crop. Cotton's been cultivated over 4,000 years. What do you think people did up until 60, 70 years ago, before we started using aldicarb and methylparathion and trifluralin?" It intrigued her, interested her to see him getting worked up, to feel the passion for his work vibrating out of him. They had slaves, and after that field hands. They could work obscene hours for slave wages. That's just one of the reasons, in case you were wondering, why the South lost the war between the states. We can discuss history another time. He leaned forward, needing to make his point. Organically grown cotton can and does use more hand labor, but it also makes use of natural resources, animal manure, compost, instead of chemical fertilizers that can pollute groundwater, cover crops to help control weeds and pests and add to revenue, and the basic soil conservation of rotation. Good bugs, ladybugs, mantis, and so on, to feed on the cotton pests instead of exposing farm workers, neighbors, children to pesticide drift. We let the plants die naturally instead of using a defoliant. He sat back as their entrees were served, topped off the wine in their glasses, but he was on a roll. "We keep up the process through the ginning. We clear the gin of residue from conventional cotton. That's federal regulation. So when it's sold, it's pure, free of chemicals. Not everyone thinks that's such a big deal for your shirt or your jockey shorts, but cotton's seed as well as fiber, and cottonseed's in a whole lot of prepared food. How much pesticide do you figure you're taking in every time you eat a bag of potato chips?" "I don't think I want to know." But she remembered her father coming home, cursing the land. She remembered watching the crop dusters dropping their clouds, and how the filaments would linger and drift toward the house. She remembered the stench of it and the burn in the air. "How did you get interested in the whole organic method?" "First year of college. I started reading about it, and, well, the fact is, there was this girl." "Ah," amused, Tori cut into her trout. "Now we see the picture form." "Her name was Laura Linda Dorset from Mill Valley, California. My tongue fell onto my toes the first time I saw her, a long, lanky brunette in tight jeans. He gave a sigh at the memory, sweet with distance, and a card-carrying member of PETA, Greenpeace, the Nature Conservancy, and God knows what all. So, of course, to impress her, I read up on animal rights and natural farming and whatnot. Gave up meat for 2 months. She lifted a brow at the steak on his plate. Must have been love. For a few bright, shiny weeks, it was. I let her drag me to a seminar on organic farming, and she let me get her out of those tight jeans. His smile was slow and wicked. Of course, eventually, my desperate need for a hamburger outweighed my devotion, and Laura Linda turned in disgust from the carnivore. What else could she do? Exactly. But I kept thinking about what I'd heard in that seminar and what I read in those books, and it made more and more sense to me. I saw how it could be done and why it should be. So when Beau Rev came to me, I started the long and not entirely without conflict process. Laura Linda would be proud. No, she'll never forgive me for the cheeseburger. It was a serious breach of faith. For months afterwards, I could barely choke one down over the guilt. Men are bastards. I know it. He also knew that she might actually eat a full meal if he kept her mind engaged. But forgiven that genetic flaw, how would you feel about being Progress's exclusive outlet for Lavelle's green cotton products? You want me to sell your shirts in my shop? She asked, surprised. Not necessarily shirts, if that doesn't fit the ambiance, but linens, tablecloths, napkins, that sort of thing. Well, caught off guard, she shifted gears to business. I'd want to see some samples, of course, but as the product would be produced here in the state, it should fit in with my stock. We'll need to discuss cost and supply and quality and style, of course. I'm keeping clear of assembly line type products. I'm providing the unique and celebrating South Carolina's impressive variety of artists and craftsmen. She paused to sip her wine and think. Organic cotton linen, she murmured. From field to display to table, all within Georgetown County. That could be very appealing. Good. He lifted his glass, tapped hers. We'll find a way to make it work for both of us. To make it all work, he added. The evening was certainly ending on a much nicer note than it had begun. With a full moon riding overhead and a lovely fog of wine in the brain. She hadn't meant to drink, she did so rarely, but it had been so pleasant to sit by the water and sip at wine. So pleasant that she'd had 2 glasses instead of 1 and was now comfortably sleepy. The car ran smooth and fast, and the wind that blew over her smelled of the approaching summer. It made her think of honeysuckle and overblown roses, the smell of tar melting in the sun, and the lazy hum of bees courting the magnolia blossoms in the marsh. Wishing to God it'd get a little cooler now that the sun gone down. If a ride didn't come along soon she could hook her thumb around, she'd end up walking all the way to the goddamn beach. Of course, it was Marcy's fault, the bitch, ditching us so she could go off and make it with that asshole Tim. Well, she didn't give a flying fuck about Marcy. She'd hitch her way up to Myrtle Beach and have a fine time. All she needed was a frickin' ride. Come on, sweetheart, stop the car. There you go, hot damn. Tori reared up in the seat, eyes wide, sucking at air like a swimmer surfacing from a long, lung-bursting dive. She got in the car. She tossed her pack in the back and got in the car. Tori. Cade pulled to the side of the road, shifted to take her shoulders. It's all right. You just fell asleep for a minute. No. She shoved at him, sick and desperate, and yanked at her seatbelt. There were hands squeezing her heart so it beat in hitchy strikes. No. She wrenched open the door, leaped out, and began a stumbling run along the shoulder. She's hitchhiking to the beach. He picked her up back there, somewhere back there. Wait, hold on. He caught up with her, had to drag her around. Honey, you're shaking. He took her. It was sliding into her head, images and shapes, sounds and scents. There was a burn in her throat, a smoker's rasp from pulling deep on one too many cigarettes. He took her, pulled off the road, pulled off and into the trees, and he hit her with something. She doesn't see what it is. She only feels the pain, and she's dazed. What's happening? What's the matter? She pushes at him, but he's dragging her out of the car. Who? She shook her head, fighting to find herself in the confusion, in the pain, in the terror. That way, just up that way. All right. Her eyes were huge, unfocused, and her skin had gone clammy under his hands. You want to walk up there a little ways? I have to. Leave me alone. No. He wrapped an arm firmly around her. That I won't. We'll walk. I'm right here. You can feel me right here. I don't want this. I don't want it. But she began to walk. She opened herself, overriding her instinct for self-preservation. She didn't struggle when the images shifted, solidified. The stars wheeled overhead, blindingly bright. Heat closed around her like a fist. She wanted to go to the beach. She couldn't get a ride. She was angry at her friend. Marcy, a friend named Marcy. They were supposed to drive together, spend the weekend. Now she's going to hitchhike because, by God, she's not going to let that stupid bitch ruin her trip. He comes along and she's happy. She's tired and she's thirsty, and he says he's going all the way to Myrtle. It's less than an hour by car. Tori stopped, held up a hand. Her head lolled back, but her eyes stayed open, wide open. He gives you a bottle. Blackjack. You take a drink, a long one, to kill your thirst, and because it's so cool to be riding along and drinking whiskey. It must have been the bottle he hit you with. Must have been, because you passed it back to him and were laughing, then something crashed into the side of your head. Christ, it hurts. She staggered and her hand flew to her cheek. The taste of blood filled her mouth. No, don't. Cade pulled her against him, surprised she didn't slide out of his arms like smoke. I can't see, There's nothing in him, just blank. Wait. With her hands fisted, her breath in rags, she pushed. Sickness rolled in her stomach, but she slipped through and saw. He took her in there. She began to rock. I just can't. You don't have to. It's all right now. Come on back to the car. He took her in there. Pity and grief overwhelmed everything else. He rapes her. Now she closed her eyes, let it come, let it burn. You fight for a while. He's hurting you and you're so scared, so you fight. He hits you again, twice, hard in the face. Oh, it hurts. You don't want to be here. You want your mother. You just cry while he grunts and pants and finishes. You smell his sweat and his sex and your own blood, and you can't fight anymore. Tori lifted her hands, ran them over her own face. She needed to feel the lines of her own cheeks, nose, mouth. She needed to remember who she was. I can't see him. It's dark and he's just a thing. There's nothing from him for me to feel that seems real. She doesn't see him either, not really, not even when he uses his hands to strangle her. It doesn't take long because she's barely conscious anyway and hardly struggles. She hasn't been with him more than half an hour and she's dead. Lying naked in the shadow of the trees, that's where he leaves her. He was whistling on his way back to the car. She stepped back from Cade then in that deliberate way of hers. All he could see was her face, pale as the moon, with those eyes swirling smoke. She was only 16. A pretty girl, with long blonde hair and long legs. Her name was Alice, but she didn't like it, so everyone called her Allie. The strain and the sorrow swallowed her up. Cade caught her, lifted her. She was as limp as the dead. Shaken as much by her utter stillness as the story she'd told, he carried her away quickly. He hoped if he got her away from that spot, that place, she'd be better. Even as he bent to lay her back in the car, she stirred. When her eyes opened, they were dark and glazed. It's all right. You're all right. I'm going to get you home. I just need a minute. The queasiness came on and the chill, but they would pass. The horror would take longer. I'm sorry, she shrugged helplessly. I'm sorry. For what? He skirted the hood, got back behind the wheel, then just sat. I don't know what to do for you. There ought to be something I could do. I'm going to get you home, then I'll come back and I'll find her. Confused, Tori stared at him. She isn't there now. It happened a long time ago, years ago. He started to speak, then stopped himself. Alice, she'd said. A young blonde girl named Alice. It stirred his memory and a kind of sickness in his gut. Does it always come on you like that, out of nowhere? Sometimes. It hurts you. No, it wears you out. It makes you a little sick, but it doesn't hurt. It hurts you, he said again, and reached down to turn the key. Cade? Tentatively, she touched a hand to his. It was... I'm sorry to bring this back to you, but you have to know, it was like hope. That's why it came so strong. It was like hope. I know it. No, you don't understand. The man who killed that poor girl left her there in the trees. It was the same man who killed Hope. Progress. Would you realize what revolution is? call it progress. And would you realize what progress is, call it tomorrow. Victor Hugo. "11. I didn't want to believe it. There are dozens of rational, logical reasons why Tori is wrong. Small points and major ones that make her claim about the teenager killed along the roadside impossible. The girl couldn't have been murdered by the same monster who killed my sister. Little Hope with her flyaway hair and eyes full of fun and secrets. I can list those reasons here in a straightforward manner, the way I couldn't seem to relate to Tori last night. I know I let her down. I know by the way she looked at me, by the way she slipped back behind that barricaded silence of hers. I know I hurt her by the way I turned aside her claim, the way I suggested, no, insisted, that she let it alone. But what she told me, what she let me see through her eyes, the horror she relived right in front of me and later spoke of with such quiet restraint, brought it all back. Brought me back to that long-ago summer when everything in the world changed. Maybe it'll help more to write of Hope than of that doomed young girl I never knew. As I sit here at my father's desk, for it will forever be my father's desk in everyone's mind, including my own, I can turn back the days and months and years until I'm 12 again, still innocent enough to be careless with people I love, still seeing my friends as superior in every way to family, still dreaming of the day when I'm old enough to drive or to drink or to do any of the magical things that belong to the coveted world of adulthood. I'd done my chores that morning as always. My father had been a stickler for responsibilities and for hammering what was expected of me into my head. At least he was, before we lost Hope. I'd gone out with him mid-morning to look over the fields. I remember standing looking over that ocean of cotton. My father stuck mostly with cotton even when many of the neighboring farms turned heavily to soybeans or tomatoes or tobacco. Beau Rev was cotton, and I was never to forget it. I never did. And that day it was so simple to see why, to stand and look out over that vast space, to see the magic of the bowls burst open by the straining lint, to watch the stalks bend with the weight, some of them carrying what must have been 100 bowls, all cracked open like eggs, and that late in the year, with the field so rich with it, the very air smelled of cotton, the hot smell of summer dying. It was to be a good harvest that year. The cotton would spill into the fields, be picked and bagged and processed. Beau Rev would go on, even with those who lived in it, little more than ghosts. I was set free shortly after noon. While my father expected me to work, to learn, to sweat, he also expected me to be a boy. He was a good man, a good father, and for the first 12 years of my life he was everything solid and warm and fine. I missed him long before he died. But when he cut me loose that day, I took my bike, the streamlined 12-speed I'd been given for Christmas, and drove through the thick hot wall of air all the way to Wade's. We had a tree house back of Wade's yard up in an old sycamore. Dwight and Wade were already there, drinking lemonade and reading comic books. It was too damn hot to do much else, even if we were 12. But Wade's mama never could leave us be. She was forever coming out and calling up, asking didn't we want this, or why didn't we come in and have a nice cold drink and a tuna fish sandwich. Miss Boots always did have a sweet heart, but she was a royal pain in our collective asses that summer. We were on the cusp of manhood, or so we considered ourselves, and it was more than mortifying to be offered tuna fish and Pepsi-Cola by a mother wearing a starched apron and an indulgent smile that turned us back into children again. We escaped, headed down to the river for a swim. I believe, out of duty, we made rude and to us brilliantly clever insults regarding Dwight's plump white ass. He, in turn, retaliated by comparing our male parts to various unattractive vegetables. Naturally, such activities kept us all in hysterics for an hour. It was very easy being 12. We discussed important matters. Would the Rebel Alliance come back and defeat Darth Vader and the Evil Empire? Who was cooler, Superman or Batman? How would we con one of our parents into taking us to see the latest Friday the 13th movie? We would never be able to face our schoolmates if we hadn't seen the insane Jason slaughter his annual quota of teenagers. Such were the vital questions of our lives at the moment. Sometime after 4, I suppose it was, after we'd made ourselves half sick on wasp-stung peaches and underripe pears, Dwight had to get home. His Aunt Charlotte was coming in from Lexington for a visit, and he was expected to be clean and on time for supper. Dwight's parents were strict, and it would not pay him to be late. We knew he would be forced to wear pressed shorts and a bow tie for the evening, and with the generosity of friends, we waited until he was out of earshot to snicker about it. Wade and I left soon after, parting ways on the road, he for town and me for Beau Rev. I passed Tori on the way. She didn't have a bike. She was walking home toward me. I imagined she'd been up playing with Hope. Her feet were bare and dusty, and her shirt was too small. I didn't really notice any of that at the time, but I remember now just how she looked, that heavy brown hair pulled back from her face, those big gray eyes that stared right into mine as I zoomed by without a word. I could hardly have taken a moment to speak to a girl and maintain my manly dignity. But I recall glancing back and seeing her walking away on strong legs, tanned with summer. The next time I saw her legs, there were fresh welts scoring them. Hope was on the veranda when I got there, playing at jacks. I wonder if young girls still play at jacks. Hope was a terror at it and could whoop anyone she persuaded to challenge her. She tried to get me to play, even promised to give me a handicap, which of course insulted me beyond bearing. I think I told her jacks were for babies and I had more important things to do. Her laugh and the sound of the ball bouncing followed me inside. I would give a year of my life to go back to that moment and sit on the veranda while she beat me at jacks. The evening passed as others had. Lila shooed me upstairs to bathe, saying I smelled of river skunk. Mama was in the front parlor. I knew because the music she liked was playing. I didn't go in, as I knew from experience she didn't care much for smelly, sweaty boys in the front parlor. It's funny, looking back, I see how much we were, Wade, Dwight, and I, ruled by our mothers. Wade's with her fluttery hands and warm eyes, Dwight's with her bags of cookies and candy, and mine with her unbending notions of what was tolerable and what was not. I never realized that before and don't suppose it matters at this point. It might have mattered then if we'd understood it. On this evening, what mattered was avoiding my mother's disapproval, so I headed straight up the stairs. Faith was in her room putting some fancy dress on one of her pack of Barbie dolls. I know because I took the time and trouble to stop at her door and sneer. I had a shower, as I had shortly before decided baths were for girls and old wrinkled men. I'm sure I put my dirty clothes in the hamper, as Lila would have twisted the lobe of my ear if I'd done otherwise. I put on clean clothes, combed my hair, likely took a few moments to flex my biceps and study the results in the mirror. Then I went downstairs. We had chicken for supper. Roast chicken with mashed potatoes and gravy, and the peas that were fresh from the garden. Faith didn't care for peas and refused to eat hers, which might have been tolerated, but she made an issue of it, as Faith often did, and ended up sassing Mama and being sent from the table in disgrace. I believe Chauncey, Papa's faithful old hound who died the next winter, got what was left on her plate. After supper, I poked around outside, devising a way I would talk Papa into letting me build a fort. Thus far, my efforts in this area had been a dismal failure, but I thought if I could locate the right spot, one that would conceal the proposed structure so that it wouldn't be the eyesore Papa imagined, I would succeed. It was during this reconnoiter that I found Hope's bike, where she'd hidden it behind the camellias. I never thought of tattling. It just wasn't the way we worked as siblings, unless temper or self-interest outweighed loyalty. It didn't even concern me, though I imagined she planned to sneak out and meet Tori somewhere that night, as they were thick as thieves all that summer. I knew she'd done so before and didn't blame her. Mama was much more strict on her daughters than she was on her son. So I said nothing about the bike and set my mind on the fort. One word from me and her plans would have been shattered. She'd have shot me one of her hot, angry looks under her lashes and likely have refused to speak to me for a day, 2 if she could hold out. And she'd have been alive. Instead, I went back into the house around dusk and planted myself in front of the TV, as was my right on a long summer night. Being 12, I had a powerful appetite and eventually wandered out to hunt up some appropriate snack. I ate potato chips and watched Hill Street Blues and wondered what it was like to be a policeman. By the time I went to bed with a full stomach and tired eyes, my sister was already dead. He'd thought he could write more, but he couldn't manage it. He'd intended to write down what he knew about his sister's murder and the murder of a young girl named Alice, but his thoughts had veered away from the facts and the logic and had left him steeped in memories and grief. He hadn't realized how completely she would come alive for him if he wrote of her, how the pictures of that night and the horrible images of the next morning would run through his mind like a film. Was that, he wondered, how it was for Tori, like a movie playing in the mind that would not be stopped? No, it was more. Did she know that when she'd been caught in that vision the night before, she'd spoken to the girl rather than about her? Perhaps the girl Alice had spoken through her. What kind of strength did it take to face that, to survive it and build a life? He picked up what he'd written, started to lock it in a drawer of the old desk. Instead, he folded the pages, sealed them in an envelope. He would need to see Tori again, need to speak with her again. He'd been right on that first day when he'd told her the ghost of his sister stood right there between them. There would be no going back or forward until they'd each come to terms with what they'd lost. He heard the old grandfather clock call the hour with its hollow, echoing bongs, 2 lonely beats. He would be up again in 4 hours, dressing in the pale light, eating the breakfast Lila would insist on fixing, then driving from field to field, eyeing the crops with all the faith and fatalism every farmer was born with, checking for pests, studying the sky. Despite, or perhaps because of all the science he studied and implemented, Cade's Beau Rev was more plantation than the farm of his father. He hired more laborers, stuck with more handwork than the generation before him. He put more effort and more of the profits into the ginning and the compression and storage and processing than his father and his grandfather had been willing to do. It made Beau Rev a self-contained antebellum plantation and at the same time a kind of busy, diversified factory. And still, with his charts and his science and his careful business plans, he would stand and study the sky and hope nature cooperated. In the end, he thought as he picked up the envelope, it all came down to fate. He switched off the desk lamp and used the moonlight spilling through the window to guide him down the curving stairs and out of the tower office. He'd need those 4 hours' sleep, he told himself, as after the morning work he had afternoon meetings at the plant. He reminded himself to pick up some samples for Tori and work up a proposal. If he could pull all that together, he could go see her the next night. As he stepped into his room, he weighed the envelope in his hand, then switched on the light and tucked the envelope into the briefcase that sat beside his field boots. He was unbuttoning his shirt when the faint breeze and the drift of smoke it carried had him glancing toward his terrace doors. He stepped over, noted they were open a chink, and through the glass saw the red glow of a burning cigarette. "I wondered if you'd ever come down." Faith turned. She was wearing the robe she favored these days and spreading her arms on the stone. Struck a kind of pose. "Why don't you smoke out your own window?" "I don't have this fine terrace like the master of the house." That had been another bone of contention, and though he agreed that she'd have made more of the master suite than he, it hadn't been worth fighting their mother over her insistence he take it after his father's death. She lifted the cigarette, drew slowly. "You're still mad at me. I don't blame you. That was a lousy thing to do. I just don't think when my temper's up." "If that's an apology, fine. Now go on and let me go to bed." "I'm sleeping with Wade." "Jesus." Cade pressed his fingers to his eyes and wondered why they didn't just bore through his brain. "You figure that's something I need to know?" "I found out one of your secrets, so I'm telling you one of mine. We'll be even." "I'll make a note to take an ad on it out in the paper." Wade. He dropped down into the iron chair on the terrace, slumped. "God damn it." "Oh, don't be that way. We're getting along just fine." "Until you chew him up and spit him out." "I don't plan to." Then she gave a short, humorless laugh. "I never plan to. It just happens." She sent the butt of the cigarette sailing over the rail, never thinking that her mother would find it and be annoyed. "He makes me feel good. Why does something have to be wrong with that?" "It doesn't. It's your business. The way you and Tori is yours." She stepped over, crouched down so their eyes were level. "I am sorry, Cade. It was mean and spiteful of me to say what I did, and I wish I could take it back." "You always do." "No, I might say I do, but half the time I don't mean it. This time I do." Since there was more fatigue than anger in his eyes, she reached up to dance her fingers in his hair. She'd always envied the weight and the curl of his hair. "But you don't pay any attention to Mama. She's got no business telling you what to do, even if she's probably right." He caught a drift of his mother's jasmine, the night bloomer. "She's not right." "Well, I'm the last one to give advice on romantic entanglements." "Exactly." She arched a brow. "Ouch, that was a quick little stab. But as I was going to say before I started bleeding, this family is screwed up enough on its own without adding a strange element like Tori Bodine to the mix." "She's part of what happened that night." "Oh, Lord, Cade, we were screwed up long before Hope died." He looked so frustrated at that statement and so tired she nearly backed off, made some joke out of the whole thing. But she'd been doing a lot of thinking since Tori had come back to town. It was time to say it. You think about it. Anger with him and more than a little self-loathing made her voice sharp as honed tacks. We were made the minute we were born, all three of us, and Mom and Papa before us. You think their marriage was some sort of love match? You might like to look at the pretty side of things, but you know better than that. They had a good marriage, Faith, until a good marriage. With a sound of disgust, she pushed to her feet, dragged her cigarettes from her robe pocket. What the hell does that mean, a good marriage? That they were suited for each other? That it was smart and convenient for the heir of the county's biggest and richest plantation to marry the well-to-do debutante? Fine, it was a good marriage. Maybe they even had feelings for each other for a while anyway. They did their duty, she said bitterly, and snapped on her lighter. They made us. They did their best, Cade said wearily. You never wanted to see that. Maybe their best was never good enough, not for me, and I don't see why it was for you. What choice did they ever give you, Cade? All your life you were expected and groomed to be the master of Beau Rev. What if you'd wanted to be a plumber, for God's sake? That was always my secret life's ambition. I often fix a leaky faucet just to give myself a thrill. She laughed, and the roughest edge of her anger smoothed. You know very well what I mean. You might have wanted to be an engineer or a writer or a doctor or something, but you weren't given the chance to choose. You were the oldest son, the only son, and your path was set. You're right, and I don't know what might have happened if I'd wanted to be any of those things, but the point is, Faith, I didn't. Well, how could you, growing up and hearing when Cade runs Beau Rev and when Cade's in charge? You never got to be anything else, never got to say, I'm going to play guitar in a rock and roll band. This time he laughed, and she sighed and leaned back against the rail. It reminded her why she so often came to his room, so often sought out his company. With Cade, she could say what she needed to. He'd let her. He'd listen. Don't you see, Cade, they made us what we are, and maybe you got what you wanted in the end. I'm glad you did, and I mean that. I know you do. That still doesn't make it right. You were expected to be smart, to know things, to figure things. And while you were off learning your life's work, I was here being told to behave, to speak softly, not to run in the house. You can take comfort that you rarely listened. I might have, she murmured. I might have if I hadn't already figured out that this house was a training ground for a good wife, a good marriage, just like Mom had made before me. No one ever asked me if I wanted something more, something else, and when I questioned, I was shushed. Let your father worry about that, or your brother. Practice your piano, Faith. Read a good book so you can discuss it intelligently, but not too intelligently. Wouldn't want some man to think you might be smarter than he is. When you marry, it'll be your job to make a pleasant home. She stared at the tip of her cigarette. A pleasant home. That was to be the sum total of my ambitions according to the rules of the Lavells. So, of course, being me, I was bound and determined to do just the opposite. I wasn't going to discover myself some dried-up, repressed woman at 30. No, indeed. I made sure that wouldn't happen to me. Ran off with the first slick-talking, wild-eyed boy who asked me, one who was everything I wasn't supposed to want. Married and divorced before I was 20. That showed them, didn't it? Cade murmured. Yes, it did, as did my next foray into marriage and divorce. Marriage was all I'd been trained for, after all, not Mama's kind of marriage. I twisted that around and strangled myself doing it. Now here I am, 26 years old and 2 strikes against me, and no place to go but here. Here you are, Cade commented. 26 years old, beautiful, smart, and experienced enough to know better than to repeat your mistakes. You never asked for any part in the farm or the plant. If you want to learn, if you want to work. The look she sent him stopped the words. It was so quietly indulgent. You really are too good for the rest of us. Christ knows how you manage it. It's too late for that, Cade. I'm a product of my upbringing and my own rebellion against it. I'm lazy and I like it. One of these days I'll find me a rich and doddering old man and charm him into marrying me. I'll take good care of him, of course, and spend his money like water. I might even be faithful, too. I was with the others for all the good it did me. Then with luck and time I'll be a rich widow, and that, I think, will suit me best. The way it suits Mama, she thought bitterly. Bitterly. You're more than you think you are, Faith, a hell of a lot more. No, honey, it's likely I'm a great deal less. Maybe it would have all turned out different, just a few shades different anyway, if Hope had lived. You see, she never even had the chance to live. That's no one's fault but the bastard who killed her. You think not? Faith said quietly. I wonder, would she have gone out that night, gone off to have her adventure with Tori if she hadn't felt as closed in here as I did? Would she have climbed out that window if she'd known that she'd be free to do as she pleased, with whom she pleased the next morning? I knew her better than anyone else in this house. That's the way of twins. She'd have made something of herself, Cade, because she'd have quietly chipped away at the bars, but she never got the chance. And when she died, the illusion of balance in this house went with her. They loved her best, you know. Faith pressed her lips together, heaved the cigarette over the rail. Better than you or me. I can't count the times afterward one of them would look at me who shared her face, and I'd see in their eyes what they were thinking. Why hadn't it been me out there in the swamp instead of Hope? Don't. He got to his feet. That's not true. No one ever thought that. I did, and it's what I felt from them. And I was a constant reminder that she died. I was not to be forgiven for that. No. He touched her face, saw the woman and the child who'd been, that she'd lived. But I couldn't be her, Cade. The tears that sheened her eyes, shone in the dim light, made them, he thought, so brutally alive. She was something they shared the way they couldn't share anything or anyone else, but they couldn't share the loss of her. No, they couldn't. So Papa built his shrine to her and found his solace in the bed of another woman, and Mama got colder and harder. You and me, we just went the way we'd already been directed. So here we are in the middle of the night with no one to call our own, and we still have nobody who loves us best. It hurt to hear it and know it was true. We don't have to stay that way. Cade, we are that way. She leaned against him, rested her head when his arms came around her. Neither one of us has ever loved anyone, not enough to put that balance back. Maybe we loved Hope enough. Maybe even back then we knew she was the one who held it all steady. We can't change what happened to any of it, Cade said, only what we do about it now. That's it, isn't it? I just don't want to do anything about anything. I hate Tori Bodine for coming back here, for making me remember Hope, miss her, grieve for her again. She's not to blame, Faith. Maybe not. She closed her eyes. But I've got to blame someone. 12. The matter had to be dealt with, and as quickly and efficiently as possible. Money, Margaret knew, spoke to a certain class of people. It bought their silence, their loyalty, and what passed for their honor. She dressed carefully for the meeting, but then she always dressed carefully. She wore a crisp suit and a dignified navy, and her grandmother's single-strand pearls at her throat. She'd sat, as she did every morning, at her vanity, not so much disguising the signs of age, as she considered age an advantage, but using them to show her character and her station. Character and station were both sword and shield. She left the house at precisely 8:50, telling Lila that she had an early appointment and would then be attending a luncheon in Charleston. She could be expected back at 3:30. She would, of course, be on time. Margaret calculated the business she had to attend to before making the drive south would take no more than 30 minutes, but she had allowed 45, which would still give her time to tend to her short list of errands before the lunch. She could have hired a driver, even kept one on staff. She could have assigned the errands to a servant. These were indulgences and therefore weaknesses she would not permit. The mistress of Beau Rêve was required, in her opinion, to be visible in town, to patronize certain shops and maintain the proper relationship with the right merchants and civil servants. This civic responsibility was never to be shrugged aside for convenience. Margaret did more than write generous checks to her selected charities. She held positions on committees. The local art council and the historical society might have been personal interests, but that bent did not negate the time, energy, and funds she funneled into them. In more than 32 years as mistress of Beau Rêve, she had never once failed in her duties. She did not intend to fail today. She didn't wince when she drove past the stand of moss-draped trees that cloaked the entrance to the swamp, nor did she slow down or speed up. She didn't notice that the planks on the little bridge had been replaced and the sumac hacked down. She drove steadily past the site of her daughter's death. If there was a pang, it would not have shown on her face. It had not shown the day that child had been buried, even when her own heart lay ripped open and bleeding out. Her face remained set and composed as she turned into the narrow lane that led to the Marsh house. She parked behind Tori's station wagon, retrieved her purse. She didn't take one last look at herself in the rearview mirror. That would have been vain, and it would have been weak. She stepped out of the car, closed the door, locked it. She hadn't been to the Marsh house in 16 years. She knew there had been work done on it, work Cade had arranged and paid for over her silent disapproval. As far as she was concerned, fresh paint and flowering bushes didn't change what it was. A shanty, a slum, better bulldozed into the ground than lived in. There had been a time in the swarm of her grief when she'd wanted to burn it, to set fire to the swamp, to see it all scorched to hell. But that, of course, was foolish, and she was not a foolish woman. It was Lavelle property, and despite everything must be maintained and passed on to the next generation. She climbed the steps, ignoring the charm of the long clay trough full of spilling flowers and vines, and knocked briskly on the wooden frame of the screen door. Inside, Tori paused in the act of reaching for a cup. She was running behind and didn't much give a damn. Tired to the bone, she'd slept late, had yet to dress. She was trying to gear herself up for a lecture on responsibility, to scold herself for self-indulgence. She hoped the coffee would help her snap her system to life so she could work up the enthusiasm it would take to go into the shop and finish preparing for her opening. The interruption wasn't just unwelcome, it was almost intolerable. There was no one she wanted to see, no words she wanted to exchange. She wanted more than anything to go back to bed and fight her way into the dreamless sleep that had eluded her through the night. But she answered the knock because to ignore it would have been weak. That, at least, Margaret would have understood. Faced with Hope's mother, Tori felt immediately guilty, frazzled, and embarrassed. "Miss Lavelle?" "Victoria?" Margaret skimmed her ice-edged gaze up from Tori's bare feet over the rumpled robe to the top of her tousled hair. This sloth, she told herself with cold satisfaction, was no more or less than what she'd expected from a Bodine. "I beg your pardon. I assumed you would be up by 9 and preparing for the day." Yes, I should be." Miserably self-conscious, Tori tugged at the belt of her robe. I'm afraid I overslept." "I need a few moments of your time, if I might come in." "Yes, of course." With all her carefully learned layers of composure shredded, Tori fumbled with the screen door. "I'm sorry, the house isn't much more presentable than I am." She'd found a chair she'd liked, a big overstuffed wingback in soft, faded blue. That and the little pie-crust table she planned to refinish eventually were the sum total of her living room furniture. There was no rug, no curtains, no lamp. Neither was there dirt or dust, but Tori stepped back feeling as though she were inviting a queen into a hovel. Her voice echoed uncomfortably in the near-empty room as Margaret stood taking a silent and damning assessment. "I'd been concentrating on setting up my shop and haven't—" Tori caught herself clutching her hands together, deliberately unlaced her fingers. Damn it, she wasn't 8 years old any longer, a child to be mortified and awed by the regal disapproval of a friend's mother. "I've just made coffee," she said, rigidly polite. "Would you like some?" "Is there a seat?" "Yes. It seems I live primarily in the kitchen and the bedroom, and will until I have my business up and running smoothly." "Babbling," Tori told herself as she led the way. "Stop babbling. You've nothing to apologize for." Everything to apologize for. "Please, sit down." At least she'd bought a good solid kitchen table and chairs, she thought, and the kitchen was clean, nearly cheerful with the little herbs she'd potted on the windowsill and the darkly glazed bowl from her own stock on the table. It helped to pour the coffee, to set the sugar bowl out, but when she opened the refrigerator, fresh mortification reared up and bit pink into her cheeks. "I'm afraid I don't have any cream or milk." "This will do." Margaret nudged her cup aside a bare inch, a subtle and deliberate slap. "If you would sit down, please." Margaret let the silence hang a moment. She knew the value of silences and of timing. When Tori was seated, Margaret folded her hands on the edge of the table and, with her eyes mild and level, began. "It has come to my attention that you have become involved with my son." Another beat of silence while she watched surprise flicker over Tori's face. "Small-town gossip is as unattractive as it is unavoidable." "Miss Lavelle, please." Margaret cut her off with a lift of one finger. "You've been away for a number of years. Though you do have family connections in progress, you are virtually a newcomer, a stranger." "Virtually," Margaret repeated, "but not entirely. For whatever reason, you've decided to return to establish a business here. Are you here to ask me my reasons, Miss Lavelle?" "They hold no interest for me. I will be frank and tell you I did not approve of my son renting you space for your business or renting you this house. However, Cade is the head of the family, and as such, business decisions are his alone. When those decisions and their results affect our family position, it becomes a different matter." The longer Margaret spoke in that soft, implacable tone, the easier it was for Tori to settle. Her stomach continued to jump, but when she spoke, her voice was equally soft and equally implacable. "And how, Miss Lavelle, do my business and my choice of residence affect your family position?" That alone would have been difficult enough to tolerate. The circumstances are inconvenient, as I'm sure you're aware, but this personal element is not in any way acceptable. So, while you will tolerate for now my business association with your family, you're asking me not to see Kate in a personal manner, is that correct? Yes. Who was this cool-eyed woman who remained so still, so composed, Margaret wondered. Where was the spindly child who'd slunk away or stared out from shadows? That is problematic, seeing as he's the landlord of both my home and business and seems to take those responsibilities seriously. I'm prepared to compensate you for the time and effort it takes to relocate, perhaps back to Charleston or to Florence, where you again have family. Compensate me? I see. With deadly calm, Tori picked up her coffee. Would it be crass for me to ask just what form of compensation you had in mind? She smiled a little and saw Margaret's jaw tighten like a bow pulled. After all, I'm a businesswoman. The entire matter is crass and deplorable to me. I see no choice but to sink to your level in order to preserve my family and its reputation. She opened the purse on her lap. I'm willing to write you a check for $50,000 upon your agreement to sever ties with Cade and with Progress. I will give you half that amount today, and the rest will be sent to you upon your relocation. I will give you 2 weeks to remove yourself. Tori said nothing. She also knew the weapon of silence. That amount, Margaret continued with her voice sharpening, will allow you to live quite comfortably during your transition. Oh, undoubtedly. Tori sipped her coffee again, then set the cup neatly back in its saucer. I do have a question. I wonder, Miss Lavelle, what makes you think that I would be in any way receptive to the insult of a bribe? Don't pretend a sensibility you don't possess. I know you, Margaret said, leaning forward. I know where and who you come from. You may think you can hide behind a quiet manner, behind the mask of some borrowed respectability, but I know you. You think you do, but I can promise you I'm not feeling quiet or respectable right at this moment. It was Margaret's composure that unraveled, that had to be gathered back, tightly rewound like a ball of yarn. Your parents were trash and let you run wild as a cat, sidling down the road to push yourself on my child, luring her away from her family and finally to her death. You cost me one child and you won't cost me another. You'll take my money, Victoria, just as your father did. She was shaken now down to the heart, but she held on. What do you mean, as my father did? It only took $5,000 for them, $5,000 for them to take you out of my sight. My husband wouldn't turn them out, though I begged him to do so. Her lips trembled, then firmed. It had been the first and last time she had begged him for anything, had begged anyone for anything. Finally, it was up to me to see to it, just as it is now. You'll go and you'll take the life you should have lost that night instead of her and live it somewhere else. And you'll stay away from my son. You paid him to leave. $5,000, Tori mused. That would have been a lot of money for us. I wonder why we never saw it. I wonder what he did with it. Well, doesn't matter. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Miss Lavelle, but I'm not my father. Nothing he ever did to me could make me like him, and your money won't change that. I'm staying because I need to stay. It'd be easier not to. You won't understand that, but it would be easier. As for Cade, she remembered how distant he'd been, how removed after her episode the night before. There's not as much between us as you seem to think. He's been kind to me, that's all, because he's a kind man. I don't intend to repay that kindness by breaking a friendship or by telling him of this conversation. If you go against my wishes in this, I'll ruin you. You'll lose everything as you did before when you killed that child in New York. Tori went white, and for the first time her hand shook. I didn't kill Jonah Mansfield. She gulped in air and let it out in a broken sigh. I just didn't save him. Here was the chink. Margaret dug her fingers into it. The family held you responsible, and the police, and the press. A second child dead because of you. If you stay here, there will be talk about that, talk about the part you played. Ugly talk. How foolish, Tori thought, to have believed no one would connect her with the woman she'd been in New York, with the life she'd built and destroyed there. Nothing could be done to change it. Nothing could be done but face it. Miss Lavelle, I've lived with ugly talk all my life, but I've learned I don't have to tolerate it in my own home. Tori got to her feet. You'll have to leave now. I will not make this offer again. No, I don't suppose you will. I'll see you out." Tight-lipped, Margaret Rose picked up her bag. "I know the way." Tori waited until the length of the living room separated them. "Miss Lavelle," she said quietly, "Cade is so much more than you believe him to be." So was Hope. Rigid with pain and with fury, Margaret gripped the doorknob. "You would dare speak to me of my children?" "Yes," Tori murmured as the door snapped shut and left her alone in the house. "I would." She locked the door. The click was like a cymbal. Nothing she didn't allow in would get in, and nothing, she told herself, that was already inside would hurt her now. She walked to the bathroom and stripped, couldn't get her nightclothes off fast enough. She ran the shower hot, almost too hot to bear, and stepped into the vicious heat and steam. There she let herself weep. Not an indulgence, she told herself, but because, as the water beat on her skin to make her feel clean again, the tears washed away the scum of bitterness inside her. Memories of another dead child, and her helplessness. She cried until she was empty and the water ran cool. Then she turned her face up to the chilling spray and let it soothe. When she was dry, she used the towel to wipe the steam from the mirror. Without compassion, without excuses, she studied her face. Fear, denial, evasion, they were all there, she admitted. Had been there. She'd come back, then she'd buried herself, hidden herself in work and routine and details. Not once had she opened herself to hope. Not once had she gone beyond the trees and visited the place they'd made there. Not once had she gone to the grave of her only real friend. Not once had she faced the true reason she was here. Was that any different from running away, she wondered? Was it any different from taking the money that had been offered and running anywhere that wasn't here? Coward. Cade had called her a coward, and he had been right. She put on her robe again and went back into the kitchen to look up the number, dialed, waited. "Good morning, Biddle, Lawrence and Wheeler." "Victoria Bodine calling. Is Miss Lawrence available?" "One moment, please, Miss Bodine." It took no more than that for Abigail to come on the line. "Tori, how nice to hear from you. How are you? Are you settling in?" "Yes, thanks. I'll be opening the store on Saturday." "So soon? You must have been working night and day. Well, I'm just going to have to take a trip up your way sometime soon." "I hope you do. Abigail, I have a favor to ask." "Name it. I owe you a big one for my mama's ring." "What? Oh, I'd forgotten." "I doubt I'd have come across it for years, if then. Hardly ever use those old files. What can I do for you, Tori?" I'm hoping you might have some contact with the police, someone who could get you information on an old case. I think you'll understand that I don't want to contact the police myself." "I know some people. I'll do what I can." It was a sexual homicide. Unconsciously, Tori began to press and rub her right temple. A young girl, 16. Her name was Alice. The last name, she pressed harder. I'm not completely sure. Lowell or Powell, I think. She was hitchhiking on 513, heading east on her way to Myrtle Beach. She was taken off the road into the trees, raped and strangled. Manual strangulation. She let out a huge breath, relieved the pressure in her chest. "I haven't heard anything about this on the news." "No, it's not recent. I don't know exactly when. Not exactly. I'm sorry. 10 years ago, maybe less, maybe more. In the summer. Sometime in the summer. It was very hot. Even at night it was very hot. I'm not giving you very much." "No, that's quite a bit. Let me see what I can find out." "Thank you. Thanks so much. I'll be home for only a little while longer. I'll give you the number here and at the store. Anything you can tell me, anything at all, would help." She kept herself busy and had nearly 5 uninterrupted hours, and still Abigail didn't call back. People stopped by the window off and on during the day and admired the display she'd created out of old crate boxes, homespun cloth, and cannily selected samples of pottery, hand-blown glass, and ironwork. She filled her shelves and cabinets, hung wind chimes and watercolors. She arranged point-of-purchase items on the checkout counter, then changed her mind and chose different ones. Willing the phone to ring, she organized boxes and shopping bags. When someone rapped on the door, she was almost relieved, until she saw Faith on the other side of the glass. Couldn't the Lavelles leave her be for one damn day? "I need a gift," Faith said the minute Tori wrenched open the door, and would have pushed past if Tori hadn't shifted and blocked. "I'm not open." "Oh, hell, you weren't open yesterday either, were you? I only need one thing, and 10 minutes. I forgot my Aunt Rosie's birthday, and she just called to say she's coming to visit. I can't hurt her feelings now, can I?" Faith tried a pleading smile. "She's half crazy anyway, and this might push her over the edge." "Buy her something on Saturday." "But she's going to be here tomorrow, and if she likes her present, she'll come on down on Saturday herself. Aunt Rosie's loaded. I'll buy something very expensive." "See that you do." Grudgingly, Tori gave way. "All right, help me out here." Faith swirled in, spun around. "What does she like?" "Oh, she likes everything. I could make her a paper hat and she'd be pleased as punch." "Lord, you've got a lot more in here than I imagined." Faith reached up and sent a metal wind chime whirling and tinkling. "Nothing practical. I mean, I don't want to get her a set of salad bowls or that kind of thing." "I have some nice trinket boxes." "Trinkets? That's Aunt Rosie's middle name." "Then she should have the big one." In the interest of getting it over and done, Tori walked over and chose a large beveled glass box. The panels were mullioned in diamond shapes and hand-painted with tiny violets and pink roses. "Does it play music or anything?" "No, it doesn't." "Just as well. She'd have it going all day and half the night and drive us all mad. She'll probably fill it with old buttons or rusted screws, but she'll love it." Faith flipped over the tag and whistled. "Well, I see I'm keeping my word." "The panels are hand-cut and painted. There are no two alike." Satisfied, Tori carried it to the counter. "I'll box it for you and throw in the gift tag and ribbon." "Very generous." Faith took out her checkbook. "Seems to me you're ready for business. Why wait till Saturday?" "There are a few stray details yet, and Saturday's the day after tomorrow." "Time does fly." She glanced at the amount Tori had totaled and dashed off the check while the present was boxed. "Pick out a gift tag from the display there and write what you want. I'll loop it on the cord." Faith chose one with a little rose in the center, scrawled off a birthday greeting, and added X's and O's after her name. "Perfect. I'll be top of her list for months now." She watched Tori secure the box with shiny white ribbon, slide on the card, then twist and loop the business into an elegant bow. "I hope she enjoys it." She passed the box over just as the phone rang. "If you'll excuse me." "Sure." Something in Tori's eyes had Faith stalling. "Just let me enter that figure in my checkbook. I'm always forgetting." The phone rang a second time. "You just go ahead and get that. I'll toddle on out in just a second." Trap, Tori picked up the phone. "Good afternoon, Southern Comfort." "Tori, I'm sorry it took me so long to get back to you." "Oh, that's all right. I appreciate it. Were you able to get the information?" "Yes, I think I have what you're looking for." "Would you hold on a moment? I'll get the door for you, Faith." With a little shrug, Faith picked up the box, but as she walked out, she wondered who was on the phone and why the call had made Tori's quick and clever hands tremble. "I'm sorry, I had someone in the shop." "Not a problem." The victim's name was Alice Barbara Powell, white female, 16. Her body wasn't discovered until 5 days after the murder. She wasn't reported missing for 3 days, as her parents thought she was at the beach with friends. The remains, well, Tori, the animals had been at her by then. I'm told it wasn't pretty. "Did they catch him?" She already knew the answer, but she had to hear it. "No, the case is still open, but inactive. It's been 10 years. "What was the date, the exact date of the murder?" "I have that here, just a minute. It was August 23rd, 1990. God. A chill ran through her into heart and bone. "Tori, what is it? What can I do?" "I can't explain, not right now. I have to ask you, Abigail, if you can use your contact again, if there's a way you can find out if there's any like crime in the 6 years before and the 10 years after. If you can find out if there were any other victims of that kind of murder on that date or right near that date in August." "All right, Tori, I'll ask. But when I find out one way or the other, I'm going to need you to tell me why." "I need the answer first. I'm sorry, Abigail. I need the answer. I have to go. I'm sorry." She hung up quickly, then simply sat down on the floor. On August 23rd, 1990, Hope had been dead exactly 8 years. She would have been 16 years old that summer. 13. The living brought flowers for the dead, elegant lilies or simple daisies. But flowers died quickly when laid on the earth. Tori had never understood the symbolism of leaving what would fade and wither on the grave of a loved one. She supposed they brought comfort to those left behind. She brought no flowers to Hope. Instead, she brought one of the few keepsakes she'd allowed herself. Inside the small globe a winged horse flew, and when it was shaken, silver stars sparkled. It had been a gift, the last birthday gift from a lost friend. She carried it across the long sloping field where generations of Lavelles, generations of the people of progress, were laid to rest. There were markers, simple as a brick of stone, elaborate as the rearing horse and rider cast in bronze. Hope had called the horseman Uncle Clyde, and indeed he was the likeness of one of her ancestors, a cavalry officer who died in the War of Northern Aggression. Once Hope had dared her to climb up behind Uncle Clyde and ride his great steed. Tori remembered hitching herself up, sliding over the sun-baked metal that reddened her skin, and wondering if God would strike her dead with a handy bolt of lightning for blasphemy. He hadn't, and for a moment, clinging to the cast bronze, the world spread out in greens and browns beneath her, the sun beating on her head like a dull hammer, she'd felt invincible. The towers of Beaurev had seemed closer, approachable. She'd shouted down to Hope that she and the horse would fly to them, land on the top turret. She'd nearly broken her neck on the way down and had been lucky to land on her butt instead of her head, but the bruised tailbone had been nothing compared to that moment so high on the rearing horse. For her next birthday, her 8th, Hope had given her the globe. It was the only thing Tori had kept from that year of her life. Now, as they had then, live oaks and fragrant magnolia guarded the stones and bones and offered shade and dapples of light and shadows. They also provided a screen between that testament to mortality and the regal house that had outlasted its many owners and occupants. It was a pleasant enough walk from the cemetery to the family home. She and Hope had walked it countless times, in blistering summer, in rainy winter. Hope had liked to look at the names carved in the stone, to say them out loud for luck, she'd said. Now Tori walked to the grave and the marble angel that serenaded it with a harp, and said the name out loud. Hope Angelica Lavelle. Hello, Hope. She knelt on the soft grass, sat back on her heels. The breeze was soft and warm and carried the sweet perfume of the pink baby rose bushes that flanked the angel. I'm sorry I didn't come before. I kept putting it off, but I've thought of you so often over the years. I've never had another friend like you, someone I could tell everything to. I was so lucky to have you. As she closed her eyes, opened herself to the memories, someone watched from the shelter of the trees. Someone with fists clenched to white bone. Someone who knew what it was to crave the unspeakable, to live year after year with the desire for it hidden in a heart that thundered now with both that craving and with the knowledge it could feed. 16 years, and she'd come back. He'd waited, and he'd watched, always knowing there was a chance someday she could circle around despite everything and come back here where it had all begun. What a pretty picture they'd made, Hope and Tori. Tori and Hope, the dark and the bright, the pampered and the damaged. Nothing he'd done before, nothing he'd done after that night in August had brought him the same thrill. He'd tried to recapture it. When the pressure built so high and hot inside him, he'd reconstruct that night and its sheer speechless glory. Nothing had matched it. Now it was Tori who was a threat. He could deal with her quickly, easily, but then he would lose this fresh excitement of living on the edge. Maybe this was just what he'd been waiting for all this time, for her to come back, for him to have her in place again. He would have to wait until August if he could, a hot night in August when everything would be as it had been 18 years before. He could have dealt with her any time over the years, finished her, but he was a man who believed in symbols, in grand pictures. It had to be here, where it began, he thought, and watching her, imagining her, stroked himself to climax as he had other times when in secret he'd watched Tori, Hope and Tori, Tori and Hope. Where it all began, he thought again, where it would end. A shudder ran through her, a chilly finger from nape to the base of her spine. Even as Tori glanced uneasily over her shoulder, she dismissed it as a product of the atmosphere and her own thoughts. After all, she was trespassing here, an intruder among the dead and beloved. The light was going, fat gray clouds rolling in from the east to smother the sun. There would be a farmer's rain that night. She wouldn't linger much longer. I'm so sorry I didn't come that night. I should have, even after the beating. He'd never have considered that I would defy him and leave the house. No one would have checked on me. I could never explain to you back then what it was like when he took his belt to me, the way every lash stripped away my courage, stripped away myself until there was nothing left but fear and humiliation. If I'd found the courage and gone out the window that night, I might have saved us both. I'll never know. Birds were singing, trills and chorus. It was a bright, insistent sound that should have been out of place and was instead perfect. Birds, the hum of bees going lazy in the roses, and the strong, living scent of the roses themselves. Overhead the sky was brooding, turgid with the storm clouds pushed by the wind that stayed high, too high to cool the air where she knelt. When she breathed, it was like breathing in water, felt like drowning. She lifted the globe again and sent the silver stars shimmering. But I'm back. For whatever it's worth, I'm back, and I'll do whatever I can to make it up. I never told you what you meant to me, how just by being my friend you opened up something inside me, and how when I lost you I let it close again. For too long. I'm going to try to unlock it, to be what I was when you were here. She glanced back again toward the screen of trees and the towers of Beaureuve that rose behind them. Could they see her from there in the stone tower? Was someone standing, closed behind the glass and watching? It felt that way, as if eyes and minds and hearts shut behind glass watched, waited. Let them watch, she thought. Let them wait. She looked back at the angel, looked down at the stone. They never found him, the man who did this to you. If I can, I will. She turned the globe, then lay it under the angel so the horse could fly and the stars sparkle. And leaving it there, she walked away. The rain was coming down strong and cool when Cade swung away from town and took the road toward home. It was a good rain, a soaker that wouldn't pound the young crops. If his luck was in, the rain would last most of the night and leave the fields wet and satisfied. He wanted to get samples of the soil from several of his fields and compare the success of his various cover crops. He'd put in fava beans the year before as they added the nitrogen his cotton was so greedy for. He'd test it the next day after the rain, then compare and study the last 4 years of charts. The fava bean crop had done reasonably well, but it hadn't produced a solid profit. If he was going to try them again, he had to be able to justify it. To himself, Cade thought. No one else paid attention to his charts. Even Piney, who could usually be depended on to at least pretend an interest, had glazed over when presented with the graphics. Didn't matter, Cade decided. No one had to understand them but himself. And if he was honest, he'd admit that he wasn't all that interested in them at the moment either. He was using them to keep his mind off Tori and what had happened the night before. So it was best to deal with her, with all of it, to clear the decks before he went home and washed off the day's work. Cade's brows drew together as the red Mustang convertible he'd been following took the turn into Tori's lane. He swung in behind it and those brows arched up as J.R. climbed out. Well, what do you think? Grinning ear to ear, J.R. patted the bright fender as Cade walked over. Yours? Just picked her up this morning. Boots says I'm going through a midlife crisis. Woman watches too many talk shows if you ask me. I say if it feels good and you can afford it, what's wrong with that? She's a beauty, all right. With the rain streaming down, both men walked to the hood so J.R. could pop it. They stood, hands on hips, admiring the engine. Loaded, too, Cade nodded in admiration. What'll she do? Between you and me and the gate post, I had her up to 95, and she stays smooth as glass. Handles the curves like a champ, too. I went on over to Broderick's yesterday. Time to trade in my sedan. Planned to get another one, then I saw this baby on the lot. J.R. grinned and ran his fingers over his thick silver mustache. Love at first sight. 4-speed? Cade strolled around to peer into the cockpit. Bet your ass. 4 on the floor. Haven't had me one of them since I was younger than you. Didn't know until I popped the clutch how much I've missed it. Hated having to put the top up when the rain started. You pop the clutch and drive around at 90, you're going to be stacking up tickets like cordwood. It'll be worth it. J.R. gave the car another affectionate pat, then glanced toward the house. You stopping by to see Tori? Thought I might. Good. I've got some news to give her she might not take well, just as soon as she have a friend around when I do. What's wrong? What's happened? It's nothing dire, Cade, but it'll trouble her. Let's just get it all said at once. He stepped up on the porch, knocked. Feels funny knocking on family's door, but I got into the habit with my sister. She wasn't one for leaving the door open for company. There's my girl, he said it heartily when Tori opened the door. Uncle Jimmy, Cade. Though her stomach did a quick pitch and jolt at seeing both of them on her porch, she stepped back. Come in out of the wet. Ran into Cade here, seeing as both of us had in mind to stop by. I was just showing off my new car. Obligingly, Tori looked out. That's quite a... She started to say toy and realized that was likely to hurt his feelings. A machine. Purrs like a big old cat. I'll take you for a spin first fine day. I'd like that. But just now she had two big wet men in her living room, one chair, and a nagging headache. Why don't y'all come out to the kitchen? There's a place to sit, and I just made some hot tea to chase the damp away. Sounds good, but I don't want to track through the house. Don't worry about it. She led the way, hoping the aspirin she'd taken would kick in without the 10-minute nap she'd planned to go with it. The house smelled of the rain, of the ripe, wet scent of the marsh. Any other time she would have enjoyed it, but now it made her feel closed in. I've got some cookies. They're store-bought, but better than I could make. Don't you go to any trouble now, honey. I got to get back home here directly. But since she was already putting cookies on a plate, he reached for one. Boots won't buy sweets these days. She's on a diet, and that means I am, too. Aunt Boots looks wonderful. Tori got out cups. So do you. Now, that's what I tell her, but she fusses over the scale every blessed morning. You'd think gaining a pound here and there was the end of the world. Till she's satisfied I'll be on rabbit food. He took another cookie. Surprised my nose doesn't start to twitch. He waited while she poured the tea, sat. Heard your store's coming right along. Haven't had a minute to get down and see for myself. I hope you'll make it on Saturday. Oh, wouldn't miss that on a bet. He sipped his tea, shifted in his chair, sighed. Tori, I hate coming over here with something that might upset you, but it seems to me you ought to know what's what. It'll be easier if you tell me straight out. I'm not sure I can exactly. I had a call from your mother just a bit ago, just as Boots and I were finishing up our supper. She's in a state, or I guess you know she wouldn't have called me. We don't telephone regular. Is she ill? No, not as what you'd call sick. He blew out a breath. It has to do with your father. Seems like he got in some trouble a little while back. Damn it. J.R. pushed his cup around its saucer, then raised his eyes to Tori's. Appears he assaulted a woman. In her mind, Tori heard the snake slither of the thick leather belt, the 3 harsh snaps. Her fingers jerked once, then settled steady. Assaulted? Your mother said it was all a mistake, and I had to pry what I got out of her with both hands. What she told me is some woman claimed your father, roughed her up, tried to, molest her. He tried to rape a woman? Miserable, J.R. shifted in his chair again. Well, sorry, she wasn't real clear on the details, but whatever happened, it got Han arrested. He's been drinking again. Sarah Beth didn't want to tell me that part, but I pushed it out of her. He got probation, contingent on his going to alcohol rehab and such. I don't figure he took it well, but he didn't have much choice. He picked up the tea to wet his dry throat. Then, a couple of weeks ago, he lit out. Lit out? Hadn't been home. Sarah Beth said she hadn't seen him in more than 2 weeks now, and he's violated his probation. When they pick him up, they'll put him in jail. Yes, I suppose. She'd always been surprised in a mild, distant way that he'd never found himself on the wrong side of iron bars before. God provided, she thought. Sarah Beth, she's frantic. Without thinking, J.R. dunked his cookie in his tea, a habit his wife despaired over. She's running low on money, and she's worrying herself sick. I'm going to drive up and see her tomorrow, see if I can get a clearer picture of things. You think I should come with you? Now, honey, that's up to you. No reason I can't handle this on my own. And no reason you should. I'll go with you. If that's what you want, I'd be pleased to have the company. I thought to leave bright and early. You be ready around 7? Yes, of course. Good. That's good. Fine. Awkward now, he got to his feet. We'll get all this straightened out. You'll see. I'll come round and get you in the morning. No, you just sit still and drink your tea. He patted her head before she could rise. I'll let myself out. He's embarrassed, Tori murmured as she heard the front door open. For himself, for me, for my mother. He told me while you were here because he'd have heard the gossip Lucy Fraser's passing around and thought I'd be better with you than alone. Cade kept his eyes on her face. She hadn't shown any reaction. He marveled at her control even while it frustrated him. Is he right? I don't know. I'm more used to being alone. Are you wondering why I'm not particularly concerned about my father or my mother? No. I'm wondering what happened between you so that you're not particularly concerned. or why you're determined not to be or show that you're upset by what J.R. just told you. What's the point in being upset? What's done's already been done. My mother chooses to believe my father didn't do what he was arrested for doing, but of course he did. If he'd been drinking, he wouldn't have been as careful to keep the violence inside his own doors. Did he abuse your mother? A corner of Tori's mouth twitched into a parody of a smile. Not while I was around. He didn't need to. Cade nodded. He'd known. A part of him had known since the morning she'd come to his door to tell them all about Hope. Because you were the easier target. He hasn't been able to aim at me for quite some time. I've made sure of that. Why are you blaming yourself? I'm not. Because his eyes were steady, she closed hers. Habit. I know he used her for his punching bag after I was gone. I never tried to do anything to change that. Not that either of them would have let me, but I never tried. I've only seen him twice since I was 18. Once when I was living in New York, when I was happy. I had this notion that we could mend the things that were broken, or at least some of them. They were living in a trailer then near the Georgia border. They moved around a lot after we left Progress. She sat like that with her eyes closed in the quiet while the rain pattered on the roof. Daddy couldn't keep a job for long. Someone was always in for him, so he said. Or there was a better job another place. I lost track of how many other places there were, different schools, different rooms, different faces. I never made any real friends, so it didn't matter so much. I was just biding time until I could get away. Save up money on the sly and wait until the law said I could leave home. If I'd left before, he'd have made me come back, and he'd have made me pay. Couldn't you have gone for help, your grandmother? He'd have hurt her. Tori opened her eyes, looked straight into Cade's. He was afraid of her the same as he was afraid of me, and he'd have done something to her. And my mother would have sided with him. She always did. That's why I didn't go to her when I left. If he'd found out, that wouldn't have set right with him. I can't explain it to you. I could never explain it to anyone, the way a fear can live inside you, the way it dictates how you think and how you act, what you say, what you don't dare say. You just did. She opened her mouth, then closed it again before something leaped out she hadn't thought through. Do you want more tea? Sit, I'll get it. He rose before she could and put the kettle back on to boil. Tell me the rest. I didn't tell them I was leaving home, though I'd planned every step of what I would do, where I would go. I packed and ran off in the middle of the night, walked into town to the bus station, and bought a ticket to New York City. When the sun came up, I was miles away, and I never intended to come back again, but... She lifted her laced fingers, then closed them again like a prayer. I went to see them that time, she said carefully. I'd just turned 20, been gone 2 years. I had a job working at a store downtown, a store with lovely things. I made a good salary, and I had my own place. It wasn't much bigger than a closet, but it was mine. I had my vacation coming, and I took the bus all the way to the Georgia border to see them. Well, maybe part of it was to show them that I'd made something of myself. 2 years I'd been away, and inside of 2 minutes it was like I'd never left. He nodded. He'd gone away to college, become a man, he supposed, during those 4 years, and when he'd come back the rhythm was the same. But for him it had been the right rhythm, one keenly missed. Nothing I did, she went on, had done, could do, was right. Look how I'd tarted myself up. He knew the kind of life I was living up north. He figured I'd just come home because I was pregnant from one of the men I'd let get at me. I was still a virgin, but to him I was a whore. I'd gotten some spine in those 2 years, just enough steel that I stood up to him. The first time in my life I dared stand up to him. It took the rest of my vacation week for the bruises on my face to heal enough that I could cover them with makeup and go back to work. Christ, Tori. He only hit me once, but God, he had big hands, big, hard hands, and they bunched so easily into fists. Absently, she lifted her hand to her face, traced the slightly crooked line of her nose. Knocked me right off my feet and into the counter of that grubby little kitchen. I didn't realize my nose was broken. The pain was so familiar, you see. Under the table, Cade's own hands curled into fists that felt useless and late. When he came at me again, I grabbed the knife out of the sink, a big black-handled kitchen knife. I didn't even think about it, she said in that calm, thoughtful voice. It was just in my hand. He must have seen in my face that I'd have used it, that I'd have loved to use it. He stormed out of the trailer with my mother running after him, begging him not to go. He flung her off like a gnat right into the dirt, and still she called after him. God, she crawled after him on her goddamn hands and knees. I'll never forget that. Never. Cade walked back to the stove, to the spitting kettle, to give her time to settle. In silence, he measured tea, poured the hot water. He sat again and waited. You have a gift for listening. Finish it out. Get rid of it. All right. Calm now, Tori opened her eyes. If there had been pity in his, the words might not have come, but what she saw was patience. I felt sorry for her. I was disgusted with her. And I hated her. In that moment, I think I hated her more than him. I put down the knife and picked up my bag. I hadn't even unpacked, hadn't been there an hour. When I walked out, she was still sitting in the dirt and crying, but she looked at me, so much anger in her eyes. Why'd you have to go and make him mad? You always caused nothing but trouble. She sat in the dirt with her lip bleeding, either from where he hit her or from biting it when she fell. I just kept walking, never said a word to her. I haven't spoken to her since. My own mother, and I haven't had a word with her since I was 20. It's not your fault. No, it's not my fault. I've had years of therapy, so I can say that with assurance. It was none of it my fault. But I was still the cause. I think, he fed on punishing me for being born the way I was. Up till the time I showed that I was different, he left me pretty much alone. I was my mother's problem, and he rarely took time for more than an absent swat. After that, I don't think a week ever went by without him abusing me. Not sexually, she said when she saw Kate's face. He never laid hands on me that way. He wanted to, God, he wanted to, and that frightened him more, so he beat me more, and got twisted pleasure from it. Sex and violence are wrapped up tight inside him. Whatever they said he did to that woman, he did. Not rape, at least not that could be proved, or they'd never have given him probation so easily. But rape's only one way a man can hurt and humiliate a woman. I know it. He got up to fetch the pot and pour her tea. You said you'd seen them twice. Not them, him. 3 years ago he came to Charleston. He came to my house. He followed me home from work. He'd found out where I was working, and he followed me home. He caught me as I was walking from the car. I was scared to death, didn't have much of that steel I'd forged in New York left in me. He said my mother was sick and they needed money. I didn't believe him. He'd been drinking. I could smell it on him. She could smell it now if she let herself, the stale, hot stench like a bad taste in the air. She lifted her cup, breathed in the steam instead. He had his hand around my arm. I could see what he wanted to do, to twist my arm, to snap the bone, and he was aroused by the images in his own head. I wrote him a check for $500, wrote it on the spot. I didn't let him into the house. I would not let him into my home. I told him if he hurt me or tried to get in the house, that if he came to where I worked, any of those things, I'd stop payment on the check and there'd never be any more money. But if he took it and left and he never came back, I'd send $100 every month. She let out a short laugh. He was so surprised at the idea he let me go. He always liked money, just the having of it. He liked to lecture about rich men and eyes of needles, but he liked having money. I got into the house and locked the door. All that night I sat up with the phone and the fireplace poker in my lap, but he didn't try to get in. Not then, not ever. $100 a month bought me a kind of peace of mind. Not a bad price for it. She drank now a long drink of tea that was too hot and too strong, and nonetheless bolstered her. Unable to sit, she rose to stare out at the steady rain. So, there you have it, just some of the ugly secrets of the Bodine family. The Lavells have some ugly secrets of their own. He got up to walk to her, ran his hand down the length of the tidy braid that hung down her back. You still had your steel, Tori. You had what you needed. He couldn't break it. He couldn't even bend it. He brushed his lips on the top of her head, pleased when she didn't step aside as she usually did. Have you eaten? What? Probably not. Sit down. I'll scramble some eggs. What are you talking about? I'm hungry, and if you're not, you should be. We'll have some eggs. She turned, jerked once when he slid his arms around her. Tears swam into her eyes, quick and stinging, to be blinked ruthlessly away. Cade, this can't go anywhere, you and me. Tori. He cupped the back of her neck until her head settled on his shoulder. It's already gone somewhere. Why don't we stay there a while and see how we like it? It felt so good, so steady to be held this way, this easy and familiar way. I don't have any eggs. She drew back, met his eyes. I'll make soup. Sometimes food was only a prop. She was using it now, Cade thought. Maybe they both were as she stirred canned soup on the stove and he put together the makings for grilled cheese sandwiches. A nice, homey meal for a rainy evening. The kind a couple might share with light conversation and for the hell of it a good bottle of wine. He could have used an evening like that, he thought. Instead, here he was slathering butter on bread the way Lila had taught him and trying to figure out the way through Tori's thin and prickly shield. You could do better than soup and a sandwich down at Beau Rev. I could. He set the skillet on the stove and stood beside her, close but not close enough to touch. But I like the company here. Then something's wrong with you. She said it so dryly it took him a minute. With a laugh, he laid the 2 sandwiches on the heated skillet. You're likely right about that. After all, I'm a hell of a catch, you know. Healthy, not overly hard on the eyes, got me a big house, good land, and money enough to keep the wolf from the door, and, in addition to that and my subtle charm, I make a terrific cheese sandwich. All that being the case, why hasn't some smart woman snatched you up? Thousands have tried. Slippery, are you? Agile. He flipped the sandwiches. I like to think of it as agile. I was engaged once. Were you? She said it casually as she reached for bowls, but her focus had sharpened. Uh-huh. He knew human nature well enough to be certain leaving it at that would swell her curiosity until she either burst or surrendered. She held until they'd set plates and bowls on the table, sat. You think you're clever, don't you? Darling, a man in my position has to be. Cozy in here with the rain and all, isn't it? All right, damn it, what happened? About what? The way her eyes narrowed delighted him. Oh, about Deborah, the woman I was on the point of vowing to love, honor, and cherish until death and so on. Judge Purcell's daughter. You might remember the judge, except I don't think he was a judge yet when you left. No, I don't remember him. I doubt the Bodines moved in his social sphere. In any case, he has a lovely daughter, and she loved me for a while, then decided she didn't want to be a farmer's wife after all, at least not one who actually worked at it. I'm sorry. It wasn't a tragedy. I didn't love her, liked her considerably, Cade mused as he sampled the soup. She was lovely to look at, interesting to talk to, and we'll say we were compatible in certain vital areas. But one, we just didn't want the same thing. We discovered that, much to our mutual embarrassment, a few months after we were engaged. We broke things off amicably enough, which goes to show there was considerable relief on both sides, and she went off to live in London for a few months. How could you... She broke off, filled her mouth with sandwich. Go on, you can ask. I just wondered how you could ask someone to marry you that you could let go again without a qualm. He considered it, kicking back to chew the sandwich as if he were also chewing his thoughts. I suppose there were some minor qualms, but the fact is, in hindsight, I was 25 and there was a bit of family pressure. My mother and the judge are good friends, and he was a friend of my father's as well. Time to settle down and make myself an heir or two was the idea. That's awfully cold-blooded. Not entirely. I was attracted to her. We knew a lot of the same people. Her daddy was mine's lawyer for years. It was easy to slide into an arrangement, one that pleased both our families. Then as time got closer, I, for one, began to feel like you do when your tie's just a mite too tight. So you can't quite get a good gulp of air. So I asked myself, what would my life be like without her? And what would it be like with her in 5 years? He took another bite of his sandwich, shrugged. Turned out I liked the answer to the first part a whole lot better than I did the second. And as luck would have it, so did she. The only ones who were truly upset were our families. He paused, watching her eat. And we just can't live our lives around what our parents want or don't want for us, can we, Tori? No, but we do live our lives carrying around the weight of it anyway. Mine could never accept me for who and what I was. For a long time I tried to be someone and something else. She lifted her gaze. I can't. I like who you are. Last night you had trouble with it. Some, he admitted. You worried me. You were frantic, he added, laying a hand over hers before she could pull away. Then fragile. Made me feel clumsy. I didn't know what to do, and I'm used to knowing. You didn't believe me. I don't doubt what you saw or felt, but I have to think part of it could be mixed up with coming here, with remembering what happened to Hope. She thought about the call from Abigail, about the dates of both murders, but she held back. She'd trusted before, shared before, and had lost everything. It is all mixed up with me coming here, and with Hope. If it wasn't for Hope, you wouldn't be sitting here now. On more even ground again, he sat back, continued to eat. If I'd seen you for the first time 4 or 5 weeks ago, if we'd never met before and there'd been nothing between us till then, I'd damn well have figured out how to get myself sitting here now. Fact is, if we'd started weeks ago instead of years, I do believe I'd have already had you in that very interesting bed. He smiled, slow and easy, when she set the spoon back down in her soup with a little plop. I figure it's time we got that out in the open so you can think about it. 14. The drive was pleasant enough and reminded her of all she'd missed by not staying close to J.R. There was such a hugeness to him in his voice, his laugh, his gestures. Twice she'd had to dodge his arm as he'd thrown it toward her to point out something along the highway. He seemed to swallow you up with his simple joy of being. He sat in the little car, his knees all but up to his chin, his big wide hand clutching the gear shift the way she'd seen some young boys clutch a joystick during a video game, for the fun and competition. The way he dived into the day, they might have been racing to some mad picnic rather than a painful family duty. Living in the now, she thought that was his gift, and a skill she'd struggled to master all her life. He got such a kick out of his new car, zipping and roaring up the interstate with his CDs of Clint Black and Garth Brooks blasting, and a natty Glen plaid cap snug down on his lamb's wool mat of ginger-colored hair. He lost the cap just past the exit for Sumter when a frisky tail of wind caught it and flipped it toward the ramp and under the wheels of a Dodge minivan. J.R. never slowed down and laughed like a lunatic. With the top down and the music up, conversation was exchanged in shouts, but J.R. still managed to hold one, with his topics of interest bouncing like a big rubber ball from Tory's store, politics, fat-free ice cream, and the stock market. As they approached the exit to Florence, he allowed as he hoped they'd have just a bit of time to slip by and visit his mother. It was the first time since he'd picked her up that he mentioned family. Tory shouted out that she'd love to stop and see her grandmother. Then she thought of Cecil and wondered if J.R. knew about the new arrangements. Thinking about that kept her mind occupied and entertained until they bypassed Florence and headed northeast. She'd never been to her parents' place outside of Hartsville. She had no idea what either of them did now for a living or how they spent their time together or apart. She'd never asked her grandmother, and Iris never brought it up. Nearly there, J.R. shifted in his seat. Tory felt his mood shift as well. Last I heard, he was doing some factory work. They leased a patch of land and were raising chickens. I see. J.R. cleared his throat as if about to speak again, then fell silent until he turned off the main road onto a shoulderless twist of pitted asphalt. I haven't been up to see their place. Sarah Beth gave me directions when I said I'd come to see what was what. It's all right, Uncle Jimmy. Don't fret about me. We both know what to expect. The scatter of houses that could be seen were small and skeletal, yellowed bones stuck on overgrown yards or dust bowl lots. A rusted pickup with its windshield cracked like an eggshell tilted on cinder blocks. An ugly black dog leaped on its chain and barked viciously, while less than a foot away a child wearing nothing but grayed cotton underwear and a tangle of dark hair sat on an old dented washing machine abandoned in a scrubgrass yard. She sucked her thumb and stared vacantly as the spiffy convertible drove by. Yes, Tory thought, they knew what to expect. The road turned, climbed a little, then veered off in a fork. J.R. switched off the music and slowed to a crawl to navigate the dirt and gravel path. Your county taxes at work, he said with an attempt at a joke, then only sighed and eased his car into the hard-packed driveway that butted up to the house. No, not a house, Tory corrected. A shack. You couldn't call such a thing a house, and never a home. The roof sagged, and like an old man's smile showed gaps where shingles had blown away or fallen off. The ancient speckled gray siding was torn and ragged. One of the windows was plugged with cardboard. The yard, such as it was choked with weeds. Dandelion and thistle grew in nasty abundance. An old cast-iron sink lay on its side and showed a black fist-sized hole in the bowl. Beside and back from the house was a metal building, gray with grime and spotted with blood-colored rust. A wire fence spit out from its side, and in this enclosure a dozen or so scrawny chickens pecked at the dirt and complained. The stench of them stung the air. Jesus Christ, J.R. muttered. Didn't think it would be this bad. You never think it'll be this bad. No call for this, no call for it to come to this. She knows we're here, Tori said dully and pushed the car door open. She's been waiting. J.R. slammed his own door, then as they walked toward the house lay his hand on Tori's shoulder. She wondered if he was giving her support or asking for it. The woman who appeared had gray hair, stone gray that was scraped back pitilessly from a thin face. The skin seemed to be scraped back as well, so that the bones jutted out like knobs. The lines that bracketed her mouth might have been carved with a knife, and the deep gouge of them pulled the lips down into misery. She wore a wrinkled cotton dress too big for her and a small silver cross between her lifeless breasts. Her eyes, rimmed red as fire, glanced at Tori, then away fast as if a look could burn. "You didn't say you were bringing her." "Hello, Mama." "You didn't say you were bringing her," Sarah Beth said again, then pushed open the screen. "Haven't I got worries enough?" J.R. gave Tori's shoulder a squeeze. "We're here to do what we can to help, Sari." With his hand still on Tori's shoulder, J.R. stepped inside. The air stank of garbage gone over, of stale sweat, of hopelessness. "I don't know what you can do unless you can get that woman, that lying slut down to Hartsville to tell the truth." She pulled a tattered tissue out of her dress pocket and blew her nose. "I'm at my wit's end, J.R. I think something awful's happened to my hand. He's never stayed away so long as this." "Why don't we sit down?" He transferred his hand from Tori to his sister, then scanned the room. His stomach clenched. There was a sagging sofa draped in a dingy yellow slipcover and a vile green recliner patched with duct tape. The tables were littered with paper plates, plastic cups, and what he supposed was the remains of last night's dinner. A wood stove streaked with soot stood in the corner, hobbled on 3 legs with a block of wood for the 4th. There was a picture of a mournful Jesus exposing his sacred heart inside a cheap wire frame. As his sister's face was still buried in her tissue, J.R. led her to the sofa and sent a pleading look at Tori. "Why don't I make some coffee?" "Got some instant left." Sarah Beth lowered the tissue and stared at the wall rather than look at her daughter. "I haven't felt much like going to the store. Didn't want to go far from home in case Han—" Saying nothing, Tori turned away. The house was shotgun style, so she walked straight back into the kitchen. Dishes were piled in the sink, and the splatters on the stove were old and crusted. Her shoes stuck to the torn linoleum floor. During Tori's childhood, Sarah Beth had cleaned like a tornado, chasing dust and grime, whirling through them as though they were sins against the soul. As Tori filled the kettle, she wondered when her mother had given up this nervous habit, when poverty and disinterest had outweighed the illusion that she was making a home, or that God would come into it as long as the floor was swept. Then she stopped wondering, stopped thinking, blocked everything out but the mechanical chore of heating water and hacking a spoon at coffee grains gone to brown concrete in a little glass jar. The milk was sour and there was no sugar to be found. She carried 2 mugs of dismal-looking liquid back to the living room. Her stomach would have rejected even the appearance of drinking. "That woman," Sarah Beth was saying, "she tried to lure my hand. She played on his weaknesses, tempted him. But he resisted. He told me all about it. I don't know where she got herself beat up, probably some pervert she sold herself to, but she said it was Han to pay him back for refusing her. That's what happened." "All right, Sari." J.R. sat on the sofa beside her, patted her hand. "We won't worry about that part of it right now, okay? Do you have any notion at all, where Han might go?" "No!" She shouted it, jerking away from him and nearly upending the coffee Tori put on the table. "You think I wouldn't go to him if I knew? A woman cleaves to her husband. I told the cops the same thing, told them just what I'm telling you. I don't expect a bunch of corrupt, God-forsaken cops to take my word, but I'd think my own flesh and blood would believe me." "I do, of course I do." He picked up a mug of coffee and gently pushed it into her hands. "I just thought maybe something occurred to you, that maybe you remembered a couple of places that he went when he went off before." "It's not like he went off." Sarah Beth's lips trembled as she sipped. "He just needs to get away and think sometimes is all. Men got a lot of pressure, providing, and sometimes Han, he just needs to be off by himself to think things through, to prey on them. But he's been gone too long now. I'm thinking maybe he's hurt." Tears spurted into her eyes again. That woman lying about him, getting him in all that trouble, it was weighing heavy on his mind. Now the police are talking like he's a fugitive. They just don't understand. "Was he going to the alcohol rehab program?" "I guess he was." She sniffed. "Han didn't need no program. He wasn't a drunk. Just now and then he took a bit to relax. Jesus drank wine, didn't he? Jesus, Tori thought, hadn't made a habit of downing the best part of a bottle of wild turkey and stomping hell out of the women folk, but her mother wouldn't see the difference. They're always on his back at work, pushing at him because they know he's smarter than they are. And the chickens cost more to keep than we figured. That bastard down at the feed and grain raised his prices so he can keep his on-the-side chickie and perfume. Han told me how it was. Honey, you have to face the fact that by leaving this way, Han broke his probation. He broke the law. Well, the law's wrong. What am I going to do, J.R.? I'm just frantic over it. And everybody's wanting money, and there's nothing coming in except what I get for eggs. I've been to the bank, but those thieving, sneaking liars took what we got in there and said how Han withdrew the funds. Withdrew the funds, they said with their prissy, lying mouths. I'll take care of the bills. He'd done so before. You don't worry about that. Here's what I think we should do. I think you should get some things together and come on home with me. You can stay with me and Boots till everything's straightened out. I can't leave. Han could come back any minute. You can leave him a note. That'd just make him mad. Her eyes began to dart around, wary birds looking for a safe place to light away from her husband's righteous fury. A man's got a right to expect his wife to be home when he gets there, for her to be waiting under the roof he puts over her head. Your roof has holes in it, Mama, Tori said quietly, and earned a searing whip of a stare. Nothing was ever good enough for you, was it? No matter how hard your daddy worked and I sweated, it was never fine enough, always wanting more. I never asked for more. You were smart enough not to say it out loud, but I saw it in your eyes. Sneaky's what you were, sneaky and sly, Sarah Beth said, with a violent twist of her mouth. And didn't you run off first chance you got, never look back either, you never honored your father and mother. You were obliged to pay back what we sacrificed for you, but you were too selfish. We had a decent life in progress, still would have if you hadn't ruined it. Sarah Beth. Helplessly, J.R. gave her hand quick, light pats. That's not fair, and that's not true. She brought shame on us, brought it the minute she was born. We were happy before she came along. She began to cry again, harsh, racking sobs that shook her shoulders. At a loss, J.R. put an arm around her and made shushing noises. With her face and mind blank, Tori bent down and began to clear the litter from the table. Sarah Beth was up like a thunderbolt. What do you think you're doing? Since you're determined to stay, I thought I'd clean this up for you. I don't need you criticizing me. She slapped the plates to the floor. I don't need you coming in here with your hoity-toity ways and your fancy clothes trying to make me look bad. You turned your back on me years ago, and as far as I'm concerned, you can keep on walking. You turned yours on me the first time you sat quiet while he beat me bloody. God made man master of his own house. You never got licked, you didn't deserve it. Licked, Tori thought. Such a friendly word for horror. Is that how you sleep at night? Don't you sass me. Don't you disrespect your daddy. You tell me where he is, damn you. You know, you can see. You tell me where he is so I can go take care of him. I won't look for him. If I stumbled over him bleeding in a ditch, I'd leave him there. Her head snapped back when Sarah Beth slapped her, and the raw, red print stained her cheek, but she barely flinched. Sarah Beth, God almighty, Sarah! J.R. grabbed her, pinned her arms while she struggled and sobbed and screamed. I was going to say I hope he's dead, Tori spoke quietly, but I don't. I hope he comes back to you, Mama. I dearly hope he comes back and gives you the life you seem to want. She opened her purse, took out the $100 bill she'd put in it that morning. If and when he does, you tell him this is the last payment he'll ever get from me. You tell him I'm living back in progress, that I'm making a life there for myself. If he wants to come and raise his hand to me again, then he better make it last. He better beat me dead this time, because if he doesn't finish me, I will him. She closed her purse. I'll be in the car, she said to J.R. and walked out. Her legs didn't start to shake until she sat down and pulled the door closed. Then the trembling started at her knees and worked up so that she crossed her arms over her torso, pressed hard, and with her eyes closed, waited for it to pass. She could hear the weeping rolling like lava out of the house and the monotonous cluck and squawk of the chickens hunting for food. From somewhere close by was the deep-throated, angry bark of a dog. And still she thought over it all the birds sang, indeterminately cheerful notes. She concentrated on that sound and willed her mind away. Oddly, unexpectedly, she found herself standing in her kitchen, her head on Cade's shoulder, his lips brushing her hair. Resting there, she didn't hear her uncle until he settled in the seat beside her and closed his door. He said nothing as he pulled away from the house, nothing when he stopped a half-mile away and just sat, his hands resting on the wheel and his eyes staring away at empty space. "I shouldn't have let you come," he said at last. "I I don't know what I was thinking, but I guess I had some idea that she'd want to see you, that the two of you might be able to make some of it up with hand gone off this way. I'm not part of her life except to blame for things. He is her life. That's the way she wants it. Why? For God's sake, Tori, why would you want to live like this, live with a man who's never given her any joy?" "She loves him." "That's not love." He spat the words out along with anger and disgust. "That's a sickness. You heard the way she made excuses for him, how she put it off on everybody but him. The woman he attacked, the police, even the goddamn bank." "She wants to believe it. She needs to." Seeing he was more upset than she'd realized, Tori laid a hand on his arm. "You did all you could." "All I could. Gave her money and left her there in that hovel. And I'll tell you the truth, Tori, I'm thanking God right now she didn't want to come home with me, that I don't have to bring that sickness into my house. I'm ashamed of it." His voice broke and he dropped his forehead to the wheel. Because he needed it, Tori unsnapped her seatbelt and leaned into him, her head on his arm, her hand rubbing circles on his wide back. "There's no shame in that, Uncle Jimmy. No shame in wanting to protect your home and Aunt Boots, to keep all of this away. I could have done what she asked me to do. I could have given her that. But I didn't, and I won't. I'm not going to be ashamed of it." He nodded and, struggling for composure, sat back again. "Hell of a family, aren't we, baby?" Gently, very gently, he touched his fingertips to the raw spot on her cheek. Then he shifted back into first, eased on the gas. "Tori, if it's all the same to you, I don't have the heart to go by and see your grand just now." "Neither do I. Let's just go home." When her uncle dropped her off, Tori didn't go into her house, but transferred to her own car and drove directly to her shop. She had hours to make up for and was grateful the work and rush would keep her mind off how she'd spent her morning. Her first call was to the florist, clearing them to deliver the ficus and the flower arrangement she'd ordered the week before. Her next was to the bakery to confirm the cookies and petit fours she selected would be ready for her to pick up first thing in the morning. It was late into the day before she'd satisfied herself that all the arrangements were in the most attractive spots. For a celebrational touch, she began to string fairy lights through the graceful branches of the ficus. The little bell on her door rang, reminding her she'd forgotten to lock it after the last delivery. "Saw you as I was passing by." Dwight stepped in, scanned the shop, then gave a low whistle. "I was going to see if everything worked out for you and if you needed any last-minute help, but seems like you've got it under control." "I think so." She straightened, standing with the end of the string of lights still in her hand. "Your crew did a wonderful job, Dwight. I couldn't be happier with the work. Just make sure you mention Fraser's if anyone compliments your carpentry. You can count on it. Oh, now, this is nice work." He walked over to a cutting board fashioned of narrow strips of various tones of wood and sanded smooth as glass. "Beautiful work. I do some woodworking in my hobby room, but nothing as nice as this, almost too pretty to use. Form and function, that's the key here. Lissy's happy with that candle thing she bought in here and shows off the mirror every chance she gets. Said it wouldn't hurt her feelings if I took a look at the jewelry and found her something to brighten her mood." "Isn't she feeling well?" "Oh, she's fine." Dwight waved at the question as he wandered the shop. "Gets the baby blues now and then, that's all." He tucked his thumbs in his front pockets and gave her a sheepish grin. "While I'm here, I guess I ought to apologize." "Oh." Seeing he appeared to be staying a while longer, Tori continued to thread the lights through the branches. "For?" "For letting Lissy think you and Cade were enjoying each other's company." "I don't mind Cade's company. Now, I don't know whether you let me off the hook or stringing me like you are those little lights. The thing is, well, Lissy just gets a bit between her teeth on some things. She keeps trying to match Cade up with someone, and if it's not him, it's Wade. She's got some wild hair about getting my friends married off. Cade just wanted to wiggle out of her last matchmaking attempt and told me to tell her he was—" He flushed now as Tori simply studied him silently. "That he was what you could say involved with someone. I told her how it was you, figuring since you'd pretty much just gotten back to town, she'd believe it and let things alone for a while." "Uh-huh." Finished, Tori plugged the lights in, then stepped back to gauge the results. "I should have known better," Dwight went on, frantically digging the hole deeper. "God knows I'm not deaf, and know Lissy tends to talk. By the time Cade got back to me to ring a peal over my head, I'd already heard from 6 different people the 2 of you were half near engaged in planning a nursery. It might have been simpler just to tell her the truth, that Cade wasn't interested in being fixed up. Now, I wouldn't say simpler. His handsome white teeth flashed again, quick, charming, and male. I tell her that, she wants to know why. I say something like, some men aren't looking for marriage. She comes back and says, it's good enough for you, isn't it? Or are you wishing you were footloose and fancy-free like your 2 best pals? I say no, honey bunch, but by then I've got 1 foot in the doghouse. Trying to look pitiful, he scratched his head. I tell you, Tori, marriage is a walk on a greased-up tightrope, and any man who tells you he wouldn't sacrifice a friend to keep from slipping off is a damn liar. Besides, the way I hear it, you and Kate have been seen around together a few times. Are you making a statement or asking a question? He shook his head. I should have said dealing with a woman's like a walk on that tightrope. Better quit while I can still make it to safe ground. Good idea. Well, Lissy's having herself a hen party, a woman's get-together, he corrected quickly, seeing Tori's brows shoot up. I'm going to wander over to Wade's and see if he wants to grab some supper and keep me company till it's safe to go home. I'll stop by tomorrow. Maybe you can help me pick out some earrings or something. I'll be happy to. He walked to the door, paused. Looks nice in here, Tori. Classy. This place is going to be good for the town. She hoped so, she thought, as she went behind him to lock up. But more, she hoped the town was going to be good for her. Dwight walked down to cross at the light. As mayor, it was important to set a good example. He'd given up jaywalking and drinking more than 2 beers a night in a bar and driving over the posted limit. Small sacrifices, he thought, but every now and again he had the urge to shake off the restraints. Came from being a late bloomer, he supposed, and gave a quick salute toward the beep of a horn as Betsy Gluck drove by. He hadn't started to hit his stride until his middle teens. Then he'd been so dazzled that girls actually wanted to talk to him, he'd stumbled straight into the back seat of his first car with Lissy. Well, a few others than Lissy. Found himself going steady with the prettiest and most popular girl in school. Before he knew it, he was renting a tux for his wedding. Not that he regretted it, not for a minute. Lissy was just what he wanted. She was still as pretty as she'd been in high school. Maybe she fussed and pouted some, but name him a woman who didn't. They had a fine house, a beautiful son, and another baby on the way. A damn good life, and he was mayor of the town in which he'd once been a joke. A man had to appreciate the irony of that. If now and again he got an itch, it was natural enough. But the fact was he didn't want to be married to anyone but his Lissy, didn't want to live anywhere but progress, and wanted his life to keep right on going just as it was. He opened the door to Wade's waiting room in time to be all but bowled over by a frantic sheepdog bent on escape. Sorry. Oh, Mongo! The blonde struggling to hold the leash was both pretty and unfamiliar. She sent Dwight an apologetic look out of soft green eyes, even while her Cupid-doll lips turned up in a quick smile. He just got his shots and he's feeling betrayed. Can't say I blame him. Since doing otherwise would compromise his manhood, Dwight risked his fingers and patted the dog through the mop of gray and white hair. Don't recall seeing you or Mongo around town before. We've only been here a few weeks. I moved down from Dillon. I teach English at the high school. Well, I'll be teaching summer classes, then I'll start full-time in the fall. Mongo, sit. With a toss of her hair, she offered a hand. Sherry Bellows, and you can blame me for the dog hair covering your jeans. Dwight Frazier, nice to meet you. I'm the town mayor, so I'm the one you come to if you've got any complaints. Oh, everything's been just fine, but I'll keep that in mind. She turned her head back toward the examining room. Everyone's been very friendly and helpful. I better get Mongo in the car before he breaks the leash and you have to give me a citation. Need a hand? No, I've got him. She laughed as she and the dog lunged out the door. Barely. Nice to have met you, Mayor Frazier. Bye, Max. Likewise, he murmured, then rolled his eyes toward Maxine at reception. Didn't have English teachers like that when I was in Progress High. Might have taken me a few more years to graduate. You men, Maxine chuckled as she took her handbag out of the bottom drawer. So predictable. Mongo was our last patient, Mayor. Doc Wade's washing up in the back. You mind telling him I'm running off to make my evening lecture? Go right on. Have a nice night now. He wandered back to find Wade straightening the drug cabinet. Got any good stuff? Got me some steroids that'll put hair on your chest. You never did grow any. 'Cause you used it all on your ass, Dwight said easily. So how about that blonde? Huh? Jesus, Wade, you been hitting that cabinet for doggy downers? The blonde with the big dog who just left, English teacher. Oh, Mongo. Well, I see it's too late. Dwight shook his head, boosted himself up onto the padded table. When you start missing pretty blondes who fill out their skinny jeans the way that one did and remember a big sloppy dog, you're too far gone even for Lissy to fix up. I'm not going on another blind date, and I noticed the blonde. I'd say she noticed you, too. Did you hit on her? Jesus, Dwight, she's a patient. The dog's the patient. You're missing a golden opportunity here, son. Get your mind off my sex life. You don't have one. Dwight leaned back on his elbows, grinned. Now, if I was single and only half ugly like you, I'd have talked the blonde onto the table instead of her big hairy dog. Maybe I did, in your dreams. Ah, but they're my dreams, aren't they? Why aren't you home washing your hands for supper like a good boy? Lissy's got a bunch of women coming over to look at Tupperware or something. I'm steering clear. It's makeup. Wade closed the cabinet door. My mother's going. Whatever the hell. Christ knows the woman doesn't need any more face paint or plastic bowls, but she gets bored to death when she's this pregnant. So how about we have a beer and something to eat, like the old days? I've got some things to do around here. Faith could come by, he thought. Come on, Wade, a couple hours. He started to refuse again. What the hell was wrong with him, locking himself in his apartment waiting for Faith to call? It was as bad as a teenage girl mooning after the football star. Worse. You're buying. Shit. Cheered, Dwight pushed off the table. Let's give Kate a call, get him to meet us, then we'll make him pay for it. That's a plan. 15. She hadn't expected to be nervous. She was prepared. She'd checked and rechecked every detail down to the color and weight of the cord used to secure her boxes. She had experience and knew every piece of her merchandise almost as well as the craftsman who created it. She had gone through every step and stage of the creation of her shop with a calm and often cool eye and a steady hand. There were no mistakes, no gaps, no flaws. The shop itself looked perfect, warm and welcoming and bright. She herself looked casually professional and efficient. She should, as she spent the hour between 3 and 4 that morning agonizing over her choice of outfit before settling on the navy slacks and white linen shirt. Now she worried it was too much like a uniform. Now she worried about everything. Less than an hour before opening, and all the nerves and doubts and fears she'd managed to ignore for months tumbled down on her like broken bricks. She sat in her storeroom at her desk with her head between her knees. The sick giddiness insulted her, shamed her. Even as she went limp with dizziness, she berated herself. She was stronger than this. She had to be. She couldn't come so far, work so hard, then collapse inches from the goal. They would come. She wasn't worried about drawing in people. They would come and they would gawk and shoot her the quick, curious glances she was already used to seeing aimed at her around town. The Bodine girl, you remember her, spooky little thing. She couldn't let it matter. But oh, it mattered. She'd been insane to come back here where everyone knew her, where no secret was ever truly kept. Why hadn't she stayed in Charleston where it was safe, where her life had been quiet and her privacy complete? Sitting there, skin clammy, stomach rolling, she wished desperately for her pretty, familiar house, her tidy garden, the routine of her demanding but impersonal job in someone else's shop. Sitting there, she wished for the anonymity she'd cloaked herself in for 4 steady years. She should never have come back. She should never have risked herself, her savings, her peace of mind. What had she been thinking? Of hope, she admitted, and slowly raised her head. She'd been thinking of hope. Foolish, reckless, she thought. Hope was dead and gone, and there was nothing she could do to change it. Now everything she'd worked for was on the line, and to preserve it she would have to face the stares and the whispers. When she heard the knock on the shop door, her first instinct was to crawl under the desk, curl up, and slap her hands over her ears. The fact that she nearly did, could actually see herself huddled there, pushed her to her feet. She had 30 minutes until opening, 30 precious minutes to pull herself together. Whoever was out there would just have to go away. She straightened her shoulders, ran a hand over her hair to smooth it, then started out to tell the early arrival to come back at 10. She saw her grandmother's face on the other side of the glass and sprinted to the door. "Oh, Gran! Oh!" She flung her arms around Iris and clung like a woman dangling off a cliff clings to a rock. "I'm so glad to see you. I didn't think you were coming. I'm so glad you're here." "Not come? For your grand opening? Why, I couldn't wait to get here." Gently she nudged Tori into the shop. "I drove Cecil crazy, badgering him to push a little more speed out of his truck. That's Cecil behind the corn plant, and Boots behind the mountain of him." Tori sniffled, then managed to laugh when Cecil poked his head around the long blade-like leaves. "It's wonderful, and so are you, all of you. Let's put it—" She turned around, calculating space and impact. "Right over there, at the end of the display along the wall. It's just what I needed." "Doesn't look to me like you needed a thing," Iris commented. "Tori, this place looks spiffy as a June bride. All these lovely things." She hooked her arm around Tori's shoulder, studying the shop as Cecil grunted the ornamental tree into place. "You always had an eye." "I just can't wait to buy something." Boots, polished as a new penny in her yellow sundress, clapped her hands like a girl. "I want to be your very first sale today, and I warned J.R. I was going to have his credit card smoking before I was done." "I've got a fire extinguisher." Tori laughed and turned to hug her. "And lots of breakables." Mindful of them, Cecil put his hands safely in his pockets. "Makes me feel clumsy." "You break it, you bought it," Iris said with a wink. "All right, honeypot, what can we do?" "Just be here." Tori let out a long breath. "There's nothing left, really. I'm as ready as I'm going to be." "Nervous?" "Terrified. I just need to put out the tea and cookies, keep my hands busy for the next little while. Then—" She turned as the door jangled. "Delivery for you, Miss Bodine." The young boy from the florist carried a glossy white box. "Thank you. My ma's coming over later today. Said she wanted to see how her arrangements look, but I expect she wants to see what you got." "I'll look forward to seeing her." "Sure got lots of stuff." He craned his neck to look around, while Tori took $1 out of the cash drawer. "I expect people will be coming in soon. Everybody's talking about it." "I hope so." He stuffed the bill Tori handed him into his pocket. "Thanks. See you later." Tori set the box on the counter and took off the lid. It was full of Gerber daisies in bright, cheerful colors and fat, sassy sunflowers. "Aren't they pretty?" Iris leaned over her shoulder for a better look. "And just exactly right. Roses wouldn't go with your pottery and wood. Somebody knew enough to send you nice, friendly flowers." Yes, she'd already opened the card. Somebody always seems to know the right thing. "Ooh, aren't they sweet? Aren't they pretty?" Boots fluttered her hands over the flowers. "Tori, honey, you'll drive me crazy if you don't tell me who sent 'em." Boots snatched the card Tori offered. "Good luck on your first day, Cade." "Aw." Head cocked, Iris pursed her lips. "Would that be Kincaid Lavelle?" Yes, it would." Don't. He's just being thoughtful." "Man sends a woman flowers, the right flowers. He's got a woman on his mind, right, Cecil?" "Seems to me. Thoughtful's a plant. Flowers are romance." "Now there, see why I love this man?" Iris tugged on his shirt to bring him down for a kiss and made Boots beam. "Daisies and sunflowers are friendly," Tori corrected, but she had to struggle not to sigh over them. "Flowers are flowers," Boots said firmly. "A man sends them means he's thinking about a woman." And she dearly loved the notion of Cade Lavelle thinking about her niece. "Now you go on and fuss with him, and I'll put your cookies out. Nothing I love more than getting ready for a party." "Would you mind? I've got one of the raku pots in the storeroom. It's perfect for these, and they'll add a nice splash to the counter." "Go on, then." Iris waved her away. "You just point us in the direction things need to be done. We'll get this show on the road." The first customers walked in at 10:15, headed by Lissy. Tori decided to take back every unkind thought she'd ever had about the former prom queen as Lissy proceeded to escort her friends around the shop and coo over merchandise. By 11, she had 15 customers browsing and debating and had already rung up 4 sales. By lunchtime, she was too busy to be nervous. There were stares and there were whispers. Her eye or ear caught more than one, but she coated steel over the prickles of discomfort and boxed up the choices of the curious. "You used to be friends with the little Lavelle girl, didn't you?" Tori continued to wrap the iron candlesticks in brown paper. "Yes." "Terrible shame what happened to her." The woman, with her sharp, eagle eyes fixed on Tori's face, leaned closer. "Hardly more than a baby. Was you who found her, wasn't it?" "Her father found her. Would you like a box or bag for these?" "A box. They're for my sister's girl, getting married next month. Seems you went to school with her, Kellyanne Frisk." "I don't remember many of the people I went to school with." Tori lied with a pleasant smile as she boxed the purchase. "It was so long ago. Would you like this gift wrapped?" "I'll do that, honeypot. You got other customers." Iris stepped in. "So, Kellyanne's getting married. I believe I remember her quite well. That'd be Marcia's oldest girl, wouldn't it? My, where do the years go?" Kellyanne had nightmares for a month after the Lavelle girl. The woman said it with a quiet satisfaction that rang in Tori's ears as she walked away. Tori was tempted to slip into the back just to breathe until her heart stopped pounding. Instead, she turned to a tall brunette who was debating over the selections of serving bowls. "Can I help you with anything?" "It's hard to make up your mind with so many nice choices." Jo Beth Hardy, Kellyanne's aunt there, she's a very disagreeable woman, and you can hardly say anything to that. "You always were a careful, composed creature. You won't remember me." The brunette held out a hand. "No, I'm sorry. Well, I was considerably younger then, and you weren't in my class. I still teach second grade at Progress Elementary, Marietta Singleton." "Oh, Miss Singleton, I do remember. I'm sorry. It's nice to see you again." "I've been looking forward to your opening. I've wondered about you off and on over the years. You might not have known I was friendly with your mother once. Years before you were born, of course. It's a small old world." "Yes, it is. Sometimes a little too close for comfort." She glanced toward the door as Faith walked in. The two of them locked eyes, and that contact sparked before Marietta turned back to study the bowls again. "But it's all we have to live with. I think I'll take this one here. The blue on white's very charming. Why don't you put it behind the counter for me while I wander around a little more?" "I'd be happy to. I'll get you one out of the stockroom." "Victoria?" Marietta lowered her voice, brushed her hand over the back of Tori's. "You were very brave to come back here. You always were very brave." She moved away while Tori stood, puzzled and surprised by the wave of grief that had flowed off the woman and into the air. She stepped into the stockroom to clear her mind and fetch the bowl, and was annoyed when Faith marched in behind her. What did that woman want? "I beg your pardon. This is employees only." What did she want, Marietta? Coolly, Tori reached on the shelf for the bowl. A number of people who come in here want merchandise. That's why I call it a store." "What did she say to you?" "And why would that be your business?" Faith hissed between her teeth and dug a pack of cigarettes out of her purse. "No smoking." "Damn it." She shoved them back in and began to pace. "That woman has no business flouncing around town." "That woman seemed perfectly nice to me, and I don't have time for your snits or your gossip," though she couldn't deny her curiosity was piqued. "Now, unless you'd like to help me replace stock or refill the iced tea pitcher, I'll need you to step back out." "You wouldn't think she was so nice if she'd been fucking your daddy." With that one snarling outburst, Faith whirled for the door. Tori remembered Faith's temper very well, and anticipating her mood, Tori shifted the bowl and slapped a hand on the door before Faith could wrench it open. "Don't you make a scene. Don't you dare bring your family troubles into my place. You want to have a cat fight, then you just go somewhere else." "I won't make a scene." But she was vibrating. "I have no intention of giving the people around here anything to snicker about. And you just forget what I said. I shouldn't have said it. We've gone to considerable trouble to keep my father's association with that woman quiet. So if I hear any talk, I'll know you started it." "Don't threaten me. The day you could push me around is long past, so you just pull in your claws around here, because nowadays I fight back." She would have left it at that, was angry enough to, but Faith's lip trembled. One small quiver of emotion, and Tori saw hope. "Why don't you stay in here a minute? Go on, sit down until you're calm again. You walk out looking like that, you won't have to make a scene to set people talking. Besides, right now they're having a fine time talking about me." She opened the door, glanced over. "No smoking," she repeated, and closed the door behind her. Faith dropped into a chair and, glaring at the door, pulled her cigarettes out again. She stuffed them guiltily back into her purse when the door swung back open. But instead of Tori, it was Boots who slipped into the room. Just because she was having a high time flitting around the store didn't mean she was blind to subtleties. She'd seen the hot rage on Faith's face just as she saw the embarrassed misery on it now. "We sure are hopping out there." She spoke cheerfully and waved a hand in front of her face. "I needed me a minute out of the crowd," and thought it was the perfect opportunity to corner the woman who had Wade wrapped in knots. "Why don't you sit down, Miss Boots?" Faith got quickly to her feet. "I was just going back out." "Oh, keep me company a minute, won't you, honey? Don't you look pretty today? Then you always do." "Thanks, I can say the same for you." Now that she was standing, Faith wished she had something to do with her hands. You must be very proud of Tori today." "I've always been proud of her." "And how's your mama doing?" "She's well. Never known her to be otherwise for long. You be sure to give her my best now, won't you?" Smiling easily, Boots wandered over to the bakery box, selected a cookie. "Haven't seen Wade today, have you? I expect he'll be over." "No, I haven't seen him today," Faith said, thinking, yet. Boy worked so hard. She sighed, nibbled on the little frosted cookie. I wish he'd settle down, find a woman who'd help make a home with him. Oh, now no point being flustered, sweetie. Boots kept nibbling, and her eyes were sharp enough to pin even a clever butterfly like Faith. He's a grown man, and you're a beautiful woman. Why shouldn't you be attracted to each other? I know my boy has sex. Well, Faith thought, there you have it. But you'd prefer he didn't have it with me. Now, I don't believe I said any such thing. She selected another cookie, held it out to Faith. We're private here, Faith, and both of us women. That means we know just how to draw a man into doing what we want him to, at least most of the time. You got a wild streak. I don't mind that. Could be I'd pictured some other kind of woman for my Wade, but he pictures you. I love him, so I want for him what he wants for himself. That appears to be you. It's not like that between us, Miss Mooney. The formal title amused Boots. If she wasn't mistaken, the use of it meant Faith was intimidated. Isn't it? She said. You keep coming back to him, don't you? Ever ask yourself why? No, she said, lifting a finger tipped with pearly pink polish. Maybe you should just think about that. I want you to know I've got an affection for you, always have. That surprises you? Stupefied her. Yes, I suppose. It shouldn't. You're a smart and clever young woman and haven't had it as easy as some like to think. I like you fine, Faith. But if you hurt my Wade this time around, why, I'll just have to snap that lovely neck of yours like a twig, that's all. Well, Faith bit into the cookie and narrowed her eyes. That clears everything up. Suddenly, Boots's face was soft again and her eyes mild and dreamy as always. She let out a light, trilling laugh and to Faith's confusion wrapped her in a hug, kissed her cheek. I do like you. With her thumb, she wiped the imprint of her lipstick from Faith's cheek. Now you just sit down and eat your cookie till you feel a little better. Since I'm feeling just fine, I believe I'll go out and buy something else. There's nothing like shopping, is there? She added as she pranced out the door. Jesus. Speechless, Faith sat down and ate her cookie. Tori kept busy but saw Faith go out 10 minutes later, just as she saw Cade come in, his Aunt Rosie in tow, during the first lull of the afternoon. It was impossible not to recognize Rosie Sykes LaRue Decatur Smith. At 64, the woman made just as much of a statement as she had at her debutante ball when she'd shocked society by doing an exuberant barefoot jitterbug on the tennis court of the country club. She'd married Henry LaRue of the Savannah LaRues when she'd been 17 and lost him to Korea before their first anniversary. She'd grieved for 6 months, then had opted to play the merry widow, flaunted a hot-blooded affair with a struggling artist and suspected communist whom she'd married for the hell of it at 20. She and the artist both espoused free love and held what many considered orgies at their estate on Jekyll Island. She buried husband number 2 there after 19 tumultuous years, when he tumbled from a 3rd-story window after spending the evening with a bottle of Napoleon brandy and a 23-year-old model. Some said foul play was involved, but nothing had been proved. At the ripe age of 58, she married a longtime admirer more out of pity than love. He died 2 years later on their 2nd anniversary after being gored and partially devoured by a rogue lion during their 2nd honeymoon trip to Africa. Burying 3 husbands and an untold number of lovers hadn't dimmed Rosie's style. She wore a wig, at least Tori assumed it was a wig, of platinum blonde, a flowing, floor-length dress striped like a red and white awning, and enough jewelry to topple a lesser woman. Tori spotted the gleam of diamonds among the plastic beads. "Toy," she said in her rusty squeak of a voice and rubbed her hands together. "Stand back, boy, I'm in a shopping mood." She made a beeline for the display of blown glass paperweights and began tucking them into the crook of her arm. Torn between amusement and alarm, Tori hurried over. "May I help you with those, Miss Rosie?" "Need 6 of them, the prettiest 6. "Yes, of course. For gifts?" "Gifts, hell, for me." She clanked glass carelessly together and made Tori's heart stop. "Why don't I put these up on the counter for you?" "Good, they're heavy." Rosie's eyes, weighed down by false eyelashes that disconcertingly resembled spiders, finally fixed on Tori's face. "You're the girl who used to play with Little Hope." "Yes, ma'am." "Got a way about you, I recollect. I had my palm read once by a gypsy in Transylvania. Said how I'd have myself 4 husbands, but damned if I want another." Rosie stuck out a hand crowded with rings and bracelets. "What do you say?" "I'm sorry." Instead of feeling awkward, Tori was marvelously entertained. "I don't read palms." Tea leaves, then, or some such. One of my lovers, young fellow from Boston, claimed he was Lord Byron in another life. Don't expect to hear that kind of thing from a Yankee, do you? Cade, get on over here and hold on to these glass things. What's the point in having a man around if you can't use him as a pack mule?" she said to Tori with a wink. "I have no idea. Would you like some iced tea, Miss Rosie? Some cookies?" "I'll just work up an appetite first. Now, what the blue hell is this thing?" She picked up a polished wooden stand with a hole in it. "It's a wine rest." "Don't that beat all? Why anybody'd want to give a decent bottle of wine time to rest is beyond me. Wrap me up 2 of those. Lucy Talbot!" she shouted across the room to another customer. "What are you buying there?" and was off like a rocket, red and white stripes flapping. "We just can't break Aunt Rosie out of her shell," Cade said with a smile. "And how's your day going?" "Very well. Thank you for the flowers. They're lovely." "I'm glad you liked them. I'm hoping you'll let me take you out to dinner tonight to celebrate your first day." She already begged off the evening at her uncle's, switching that to a Sunday family dinner the following day. She was going to be tired and wired, she reminded herself, not fit company. "I'd like that. I'll come by your place around 7:30. That work for you?" "Yes, that'll be perfect. Cade, does your aunt really want all these things? I don't know what anyone could want with 6 glass paperweights." "She'll enjoy 'em, then she'll forget where she bought 'em and make up some story about how she found 'em in a dusty little shop in Beirut, or claim she stole them from her lover, the Breton Count, when she left him. Then she'll give them away to the paper boy or the next Jehovah's Witness who comes to her door." "Oh, well, you'll want to keep an eye on her. She tends to slip things in her pockets, absent-mindedly," he continued when Tori's eyes went wide. "You just keep track of what goes in and add it to her bill at the end." But even as she glanced over, she saw Rosie slide a spoon rest into the wide-slit pocket of her dress. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Tori rushed over, leaving Cade chuckling. "Rosie hasn't changed any," Iris commented. "No, ma'am, not a whit. Bless her for it. How are you, Miss Mooney?" "Fiddle fit. You're looking fit yourself. Grew into your feet well enough. How's your family?" "They're well, thank you." "I was sorry to hear about your daddy. He was a good man and an interesting one. You don't always get both in one." "I suppose you don't. He always spoke highly of you." "He gave me a chance to earn a decent living after I lost my husband, to put food on the table for my children. I don't forget that. You got something of him around your eyes. Are you a fair man like he was now that you're full grown, Kincaid?" "I try to be." As Rosie let out a cackle and batted at the wind chimes to send them singing, Cade glanced over, met Tori's exasperated eyes. Tori's got her hands full. She can deal with it. She's good at dealing with things. Sometimes maybe a little too good. She gets her back up when you want to help. "She can," Iris agreed. "From where I'm standing, I don't think the only thing you want to do about Tori is help her. I'd say there's something more basic on your mind along with that, and as I hope I'm correct in that assumption, I'd like to give you something everyone needs from time to time and no one likes to take." He adjusted the balance of the paperweights he still carried. "And that would be advice?" She beamed at him. "You're a smart boy. Always thought so. Advice it is. Just one little bit of it. Don't drag your feet. If there's one thing every woman deserves at least once in her life, it's to be swept off hers. Now, give me some of those things before they get banged together and cracked." "She's not sure of me yet." Cade transferred 2 of the paperweights and carried the other 4 to the counter. "She needs some time." "She tell you that?" "More or less." Iris just rolled her eyes. "Men, don't you know a woman who says that's either one of 3 things? She's not really interested, she's being coy, or she's been hurt before. Tori'd tell you straight out if she wasn't interested. There isn't a coy bone in her body, so that leaves number 3. You see that man over there?" Baffled, Cade glanced over to where Cecil was arranging fresh cookies on a plate with hands the size of whole smoked hams. "Yes, ma'am." "You hurt my baby and I'll send that big old bear after you with a pipe wrench. But since I don't think you're going to do that, I'd suggest you show her that there are some men worth trusting." "I'm working on that. Since my girl is trying to convince herself that the two of you are no more than friendly acquaintances, I'd say work faster." "Chew on that," Iris mused, then moved off to try to prod another customer into a sale. She put 5 napkin rings into her pocket. At 6:10, with the door locked and Cecil nodding off in the stockroom, Tori plopped on her counter stool and threw up her hands. 5. Now, I could see, in a twisted way, taking 4 or 6, but what kind of person takes 5 napkin rings? Don't imagine she was thinking of them as a set. Add 2 spoon rests, 3 wine toppers, and a pair of salad tongs. She put those in her pocket while I was standing right there talking to her, put them in her pocket, smiled, then took off her pink plastic beads and gave them to me. Still bemused, Tori fingered the beads around her neck. "She likes you. Rosie's always giving things to people she takes a shine to." "I don't feel right charging her for all those things. She might not even have wanted them. Lord Grant, she spent over $1,000. 1,000, she repeated and pressed a hand to her stomach. "I think I might be sick after all." "No, you won't. You'll be happy soon as you let yourself be. Now I'm going to go give Cecil a shake and move him along so you have a chance to catch your breath. You come on by JR's around 1 tomorrow. It's too long since we had the family together." "I'll be there." "Gran, I don't know how to thank you for staying all day. You must be tired." "My feet are smarting some, and I'm ready to put 'em up and let Boots give me a glass of wine." She leaned over to kiss Tori's cheek. "You celebrate, you hear?" Celebrate, Tori thought after she'd made her notes, tidied and locked up. She could barely think, much less celebrate. She'd gotten through the day, more than gotten through it, she told herself on the day's drive home. She'd proven that she was back to stay, back to make a mark. Not just survival this time, but success. Some might look at her and see the small, hollow-eyed girl in hand-me-downs, but it wasn't going to matter. More would look and see just what she'd made herself, what she wanted to be. She would make that matter. She wasn't going to fail, and she wasn't going to run. This time, finally, she was going to win. The wonder of that began to set in as she turned into her lane, as she saw the house as it had been and as it was, herself as she had been, as she was. Unable to fight them back any longer, she laid her head on the steering wheel and let the tears come. She was sitting on the ground trying not to cry. Only babies cried. And she was not a crybaby. But the tears leaked out despite her. She'd skinned her knees and her elbow and the heel of her hand when she'd fallen off the bike. The scraped skin burned and seeped blood. She wanted to go to Lila and be hugged and petted and soothed. Lila would give her a cookie and make it all better. She didn't care about learning how to ride a stupid bike anyway. She hated the stupid bike. It lay beside her, a downed soldier with one wheel still spinning in a mocking whirl as she lay her head on her folded arms and sniffled. She was just 6. "Hope, what the heck are you doing?" Cade rushed down the lane, his Nikes bulleting on the gravel. His father had dropped him off at the entrance to Beau Rev, giving him his freedom for the rest of the Saturday morning. His whole world had been wrapped around how quickly he could get his bike and ride to the swamp to meet up with Wade and Dwight. And here was his old and beloved 3-speed crashed with his baby sister sprawled beside it. He wasn't sure which he wanted to do more, yell at her or croon to his wounded bike. "Oh, man, look at this. You ruined the paint. Damn it." He hissed the last. He was just beginning to try out swear words in secret. You got no business taking my bike. You got your own. It's a baby bike. She lifted her face and tears streaked through the fine layer of dirt on her cheeks. Mama won't let Daddy take off the training wheels. Well, geez, guess why? Disgusted, he righted his bike and sent her a superior look. Go on inside and get Lila to wash you up, and keep your sticky fingers off my stuff. I just want to learn. She swiped a hand under her nose, and through the tears shone a light of defiance. I could ride as good as you if somebody'd teach me. Yeah, right. He snorted, swung a leg over the bar. You're just a little girl. She sprang to her feet then, thin chest heaving with insult. I'll get bigger, she said between her teeth. I'll get bigger and I'll ride faster than you or anybody. Then you'll be sorry. Oh, now I'm shaking. The amusement was coming back, sliding into his deep blue eyes, crinkling them at the corners. If a guy was going to be saddled with a couple of little sisters, the least he could do was tease them. I'll always be bigger. I'll always be older. I'll always be faster. Her bottom lip trembled, a sure sign more tears wanted to come. He sneered at her, shrugged, and began to pedal up the lane, popping a quick wheelie just to prove his superior talents. When he glanced back, grin wide, to make sure she'd witnessed his prowess, he saw her head was bent, her tangled hair hanging forward in a curtain. A thin trickle of blood slid down her shin. He stopped, rolled his eyes, shook his head. His friends were waiting. There were a zillion things to do. Half of Saturday was already gone. He didn't have time to waste on girls, especially sisters. But he heaved a weighty sigh and rode the bike back. As annoyed with himself as with her now, he hopped off. Get on, damn it. She sniffled again, knuckled her eyes, and peered at him. Really? Yeah, come on, I haven't got all day. Joy sprang into her, rushing her heartbeat as she climbed onto the seat. As her hands clutched the rubber tips of the handlebars, she giggled. Pay attention, this is serious business. He glanced back toward the house and hoped to God his mother didn't chance to look out. She'd have them both skinned for supper. No, you gotta, center your body. It embarrassed him to say body, though he couldn't say why, and keep looking forward. She looked up at him, all trust, her smile bright as the sunlight that streamed through the new spring leaves. Okay. He remembered the way his father had taught him to ride and kept his hand on the back of the seat, jogging lightly as she began to pedal. The bike wobbled comically. They made it 3 yards before she went down. She didn't cry, didn't hesitate to get back on. He had to give her points for it. They pedaled and jogged together, up the lane and down again, past the big oaks, the sunny-faced daffodils, the young tulips, while late morning waned away to afternoon. Her skin was slicked with sweat now, and her heart kept bumping, bumping, bumping. More than once she bit her bottom lip hard to hold back a squeal as the bike tipped. She heard his breath near her ear, felt his hand reach to steady her, and was filled with love for him. More than for herself now, it was for him she was determined to succeed. I can do it, she whispered to herself as the bike tipped and was righted. Her eyes narrowed in the fierce concentration of a child with only one goal, one world, one path. Her legs trembled and the muscles in her arms were tight as drums. The bike wobbled under her but didn't fall. And suddenly Cade was jogging along beside her, a grin splitting his face. You're doing it! Keep going! You're doing it! I'm riding! Under her the bike became a majestic steed. With her face lifted, she rode like the wind. Tori woke on the ground beside her car, her muscles trembling, her pulse pounding, with an ache of joy and joys lost in her heart.
God help us, but I'm hungry enough myself, I'll risk it. Branagh walked back with them, glancing back once. Right up the arse, she thought.